The velvet of the chair felt impossibly soft beneath Emma's worn dress, a cruel contrast to the harsh reality setting in. Across the gleaming table, a single chair stood pulled out, its emptiness a gaping hole in the fabric of her evening, a void where a vibrant presence had just been. The faint, sweet scent of gardenias from a small vase in the center of the table seemed to mock the acrid taste of despair in her mouth, a bitter tang that coated her tongue. She could still hear the distant murmur of other diners, a gentle symphony of laughter and clinking silverware that felt entirely alien to her own silent, shattering world. His words, sharp and final, still echoed in the quiet hum of the Grand Bistro, though they were uttered only minutes ago. "This isn't working, Emma," he had said, his voice flat, devoid of any warmth or regret, even after all their shared moments, all their whispered dreams. He had simply stood, pushed back his chair with an abrupt scrape that seemed to tear through the elegant quiet, and walked away without a backward glance, disappearing into the soft glow of the restaurant's entrance. The lingering scent of his expensive cologne, now just a ghost in the air around her, felt like a cruel joke, a taunting reminder of what was now irrevocably lost. Emma had watched him go, a slow, disbelieving horror creeping through her veins, freezing her in place. Her mind, usually so quick to analyze and adapt, to find solutions even in the most dire circumstances, felt sluggish, trapped in a relentless loop of confusion and pain. Had this really just happened? Had he truly walked out, abandoning her alone in this monument to extravagance, to a future they had supposedly been building together? A tremor ran through her hand, causing the half-empty water glass to wobble slightly on its coaster, sending tiny ripples across the surface. She quickly gripped it, her fingers locking around the cool, smooth glass, the sensation a desperate anchor in her swirling reality. She knew if she let go, if she allowed herself to truly break, she might spill it, and the thought of drawing any more attention to herself, of adding to her public humiliation, filled her with a desperate, burning shame. The plush red velvet of the banquette, once a symbol of a rare, luxurious evening, now felt like a poem, trapping her in plain sight, a butterfly pinned under glass for all to observe. She was a spectacle of abandonment, a tableau of quiet humiliation, illuminated by the discreet amber lighting. Her eyes flickered nervously around the room, worried that someone, anyone, might be watching her, might be pitying her, might see the raw wound of her rejection. She felt exposed, stripped bare by his casual cruelty, her vulnerability laid bare for an indifferent world. The soft jazz piano playing a familiar, melancholic tune seemed to underscore her profound isolation, each note a deliberate, painful echo of her shattered hopes. Every chord was a stab, a reminder of the dreams he had so carelessly shredded, the promises he had so easily broken. She could almost taste the dust of her crumbling future on her tongue. She tried to recall his exact words, searching for a hidden meaning, a softening, anything that might explain the suddenness of his departure. But there was nothing, just that cold, definitive statement, delivered with the practiced ease of someone severing an inconvenient tie. It had been quick, clean, brutal in its efficiency. He hadn't even offered an apology, not a single word of comfort or explanation beyond his vague dissatisfaction. Emma felt a deep, chilling cold seep into her bones, a realization that she had been utterly fooled, that her heart, which she had so carefully guarded, had been played for a fool. The warmth she had felt for him, the tentative hope, now felt like a phantom limb, an ache for something that was no longer there. A shadow fell over the pristine white tablecloth, interrupting her spiraling thoughts and pulling her abruptly back to the immediate, terrifying present. The waiter, a man with practiced indifference and impeccable posture, approached their table. He was young, perhaps in his early 20s, but his eyes held the weary wisdom of one who had seen countless dramas unfold in this very room, countless hearts breaking over expensive meals. A slender leather folder, sleek and black, was held expertly in his hand, a seemingly innocuous object that now felt like a harbinger of doom. Emma watched his descent, her breath catching in her throat, a cold dread washing over her, a premonition of something far worse than just being left alone. She knew what was coming, or at least she thought she did. She braced herself for the expected, already calculating how she would explain the situation, how she would beg for time, for understanding. She would tell him her partner had stepped out, that she would handle it. But nothing could have prepared her for the full weight of what he then placed before her. He set the bill down with a soft thud, a silent pronouncement of her new status, a definitive end to any pretense of normalcy or dignity. The elegant script on the paper seemed to mock her, itemizing a meal she had barely touched, a bottle of wine she had only sipped, an evening that had gone from promising to utterly ruinous in the blink of an eye. Her fingers, trembling slightly, despite her best efforts to control them, reached for the black folder. Her eyes scanned the figures, expecting a certain sum, a large one, undoubtedly, for a restaurant of this caliber. But a sum she might somehow scrape together from her meager savings, perhaps even borrow from a friend, though the thought of asking always filled her with a deep, crushing reluctance. She had mentally prepared for a few $100s, a painful but manageable blow. Then she saw it, buried halfway down the page, almost a hidden landmine in the sea of numbers, a cruel surprise waiting to detonate. A second line, an older charge, marked overdue and significant, completely unexpected, utterly devastating. It was his tab, weeks of his indulgence, dinners and drinks he had put on their supposed shared account. Dates he had claimed were romantic gestures, now added to tonight's extravagant meal, the final bitter dessert. The blood drained from her face, leaving her skin feeling cold and tight, like parchment stretched taut over brittle bones. The total amount swam before her eyes, a dizzying cascade of numbers that made her stomach clench with a sudden painful spasm, a sharp twisting knot of nausea. It was more than $2,700. More than her emergency fund, if she even had such a thing anymore, after months of trying to keep up with endless expenses. It was more than her mother's next round of crucial physical therapy, the therapy that might, just might, give her mother back some small measure of independence from the chronic, debilitating illness that had stolen so much. It was more than she earned in 3 full months of working 2 grueling jobs, a crushing, insurmountable figure that mocked her tireless efforts. Her own debts already formed a suffocating blanket, pulling her deeper into a dark, airless abyss. Every waking moment was a tightrope walk over a chasm of financial ruin. Every decision weighed against its monetary cost. Her mother's medical bills, a constant, gnawing worry, seemed to multiply with every passing day, a relentless, growing monster devouring her peace of mind. The specialized medication, the home nursing care, the endless array of appointments, each an arrow piercing her dwindling resources. The small faded apartment she called home, barely 2 rooms filled with inherited furniture and worn memories, barely affording her a roof over her head, felt like a luxury she could no longer justify, a precarious perch on the edge of homelessness. She often worked late into the night, scrubbing floors in empty office buildings or waiting tables at a greasy diner, just to keep the wolves of eviction and repossession at bay. Every penny she earned, every extra hour she worked, dissolved into the endless void of obligations, disappearing before she even felt its weight in her hand, leaving her with nothing but exhaustion. She lived on instant noodles and stale bread, while he had been charging champagne and caviar to their supposed shared future, to an account she didn't even know existed. This new sum, a monument to another's careless extravagance, felt like the final blow, a shovel of earth on her already buried hopes, sealing her fate. It was a sum beyond her wildest, most desperate dreams of earning, a number that mocked her efforts, scoffed at her endless struggle, her quiet dedication. It laughed at her quiet pride, her stubborn refusal to ask for help, her fierce independence. He had not just left her, he had left her with his ruin, a poisonous inheritance she could never afford, a burden too heavy for her already burdened shoulders. The warmth she thought she had found, the fragile promise of a shared future, evaporated into this bitter, cold reality, leaving behind only an icy, desolate void in her heart. Her chest ached with a pain far deeper than mere financial worry, a dull, throbbing ache that spread through her entire being. It was the ache of betrayal, of being deemed disposable, a burden to be shed without a second thought, a used commodity. She had always prided herself on her resilience, her ability to face hardship with a quiet determination, to find a way forward even when the path seemed completely blocked, even when hope felt like a distant star. But now that wellspring of strength felt utterly dry, depleted by endless disappointment, by one heartbreak too many, by a relentless series of blows. She imagined herself trying to explain this new, impossible debt to her mother, to her creditors, to the collection agencies that already hounded her phone with their aggressive, unforgiving demands. The thought alone made her feel physically ill, a wave of nausea sweeping through her, making the opulent room spin slightly, threatening to overwhelm her. She was adrift in an ocean of despair, with no land in sight, no hand reaching out to save her from the encroaching darkness, from the crushing weight of her failure. This was it, she realized with a chilling certainty, a cold clarity that cut through the fog of her shock and disbelief. This was the absolute bottom, the very floor of her existence, and there was absolutely nowhere left to fall. The pristine white linen of the tablecloth felt rough beneath her clammy fingertips, a stark texture against her fevered skin. She pressed her thumbs into her temples, willing the dizziness to recede, willing the pounding in her head to quiet. How could she have been so blind, so foolish, so utterly naive? Every shared meal, every whispered promise, every gentle touch now felt like a calculated deception, a carefully constructed illusion designed to manipulate her. He had painted a future for them, a cozy apartment filled with morning sunlight, weekends by the coast watching the waves, a life free from the constant gnawing anxiety that had been her steady companion for years. She had clung to those images, those fragile hopes, like a desperate drowning victim clings to a splintered piece of driftwood in a raging storm. Now the rope had been cut, the driftwood snatched away, and she was plunging into the icy depths, alone and helpless. She glanced again at the bill, the numbers blurring, then sharpening into stark, unforgiving digits that seemed to mock her. $2,743. Her breath hitched in her throat, a sharp, painful gasp. That was more than her emergency fund, if she even had such a thing anymore, after months of depleting it for her mother's care. That was the money she had painstakingly saved, penny by excruciating penny, for her mother's crucial physical therapy, the therapy that might, just might, give her mother back some small measure of mobility, some dignity in her daily life. Her mother, frail and weary, her body riddled with chronic pain, dependent on Emma for almost everything, was the only reason Emma kept fighting, the only flickering flame in her dark world. The thought of failing her, of not being able to provide what little comfort and hope she could, was a pain sharper than any physical wound, a searing agony that twisted in her gut, a cold, hard knot of fear and desperation. The clinking of ice in a nearby glass, the distant chattering of a happy couple celebrating an anniversary, the rich aroma of roasted duck passing by her table, all of it intensified her sense of profound, aching loneliness. She felt like an alien observer in a world that had suddenly decided to exclude her, to cast her out. This beautiful, expensive restaurant, a place of celebration and indulgence, of whispered secrets and shared dreams, had become the stage for her utter ruin, for the public dismantling of her last vestiges of hope. She could feel the prickle of tears behind her eyes, hot and insistent, burning against her eyelids. But she refused to let them fall. Not here, not now, not in front of strangers. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break, of witnessing her collapse. Her pride, a tattered but fiercely guarded banner, still fluttered defiantly in the face of this storm, a last desperate act of defiance against the crushing weight of her reality. But how long could pride sustain her? Her apartment was small, barely 2 rooms, and the landlord had been hinting at overdue repairs, at the rising cost of living, at the need for a rent increase. The old refrigerator hummed a dying song, its contents sparse and uninspiring, and the heating bill for the brutal winter months already loomed like a monstrous predator, waiting to pounce. She worked at the local public library during the day, surrounded by the quiet comfort of books, a refuge she cherished, a brief escape into other worlds. But the pay was barely enough to cover the barest necessities, to keep the lights on and food on the table, however meager. In the evenings, she cleaned offices in the city's financial district, her hands aching from scrubbing, her body weary from endless hours, pushing back against the crushing fatigue with sheer willpower and a desperate hope for a better tomorrow. She dreamed of a day when she wouldn't have to choose between groceries and her mother's medication, when she wouldn't have to ration every single dollar. She dreamed of a life where the shadow of debt didn't constantly darken her doorstep, didn't follow her like a hungry ghost. And then he had come along, charming, handsome, seemingly successful with a smile that promised everything. He had spun tales of his own modest beginnings, of understanding her struggles, of wanting to build a better life together, a life of shared dreams and burdens. She had wanted to believe him so desperately, perhaps too desperately, her heart yearning for a moment of respite, a flicker of genuine connection. Her heart so guarded after years of disappointments, after countless setbacks and betrayals, had begun to open, just a crack, letting in a sliver of fragile hope, a dangerous warmth. She had allowed herself to imagine a future where the weight of the world wasn't solely on her slender shoulders, where she had a partner to share the load. Now that crack had splintered into a million tiny pieces, leaving her heart exposed and raw, bleeding from the fresh wound. The waiter returned, his presence a silent question, his eyes carefully neutral. Emma felt her cheeks flush with heat, a wave of mortification washing over her. She hated this feeling, the burning humiliation that crept up her neck, making her ears tingle, making her whole body feel like it was on fire. She cleared her throat, trying to find her voice, to form words that wouldn't betray the utter chaos raging within her, the silent scream echoing in her mind. "There seems to be a mistake," she managed, her voice barely a whisper, a thin, reedy sound that sounded foreign even to her own ears, weak and unconvincing. She pushed the folder slightly towards him, her fingers still clinging to the edge, as if letting go would make the problem entirely hers, entirely undeniable. The waiter, however, merely offered a polite, practiced smile, a professional mask that betrayed nothing. "There is no mistake, madam," he said, his tone even, devoid of any judgment. Yet it felt like the most damning condemnation she had ever heard. "The total reflects all outstanding charges on this table's account." Mr. Thomas confirmed he would be settling his part tonight, but did not. Mr. Thomas, his name spoken so casually, so matter-of-factly, felt like a fresh wound, twisting the knife deeper into her heart. He had used her, used their supposed relationship to accrue his own debts, to indulge his own desires, then dumped them squarely in her lap, like an unwanted soiled garment. It was a calculated cruelty, a final devastating blow, a testament to his utter disregard for her. Her eyes darted around the room again, searching for an escape, for a distraction, for anything that might offer a moment's reprieve from her agony. A woman in a shimmering gown laughed a little too loudly at a nearby table, her diamond earrings catching the soft glow of the chandelier, sparkling with an indifferent brilliance. A businessman, deep in conversation with a colleague, gestured expansively with a gold pen, his voice booming with confidence and authority. They were all living in a different world, a world where such a bill was a mere trifle, an afterthought, a negligible sum. Emma's world was crumbling around her, reduced to the stark, terrifying figures on this single piece of paper, a universe of pain encapsulated in black ink. She tried to rationalize, to think of solutions, to conjure a miracle, but her mind felt like a tangled mess of broken threads, a frayed tapestry of despair. Call the police? For a restaurant bill? They would laugh her out of the station, dismiss her as a foolish woman caught in a lover's spat. Call his family? They barely acknowledged her existence, always seeing her as beneath him, an unsuitable match, a temporary diversion. Her own friends, few as they were struggling themselves, living paycheck to paycheck, barely able to keep their own heads above water, certainly not in a position to offer such a substantial sum. There was no one, absolutely no one she could turn to, no lifeline in this vast, indifferent ocean. A profound sense of isolation settled over her, heavier than any physical burden she had ever known. a crushing weight that pressed down on her soul. She was utterly alone, adrift in a sea of her own making, or rather, a sea he had created and then, with a casual shove, pushed her into. The exhaustion she had felt for weeks, months even, a constant low-level thrum beneath her skin, suddenly intensified, seeping into her bones, making her shoulders slump, making her entire body ache with a weary resignation. She wanted to lay her head down on the cool tablecloth and simply disappear, to cease to exist in this moment of unbearable pain, to vanish from this opulent restaurant, from this impossible situation, from her life entirely. But she couldn't. Her mother needed her. That single thought, a fragile anchor in the stormy sea of her despair, kept her from completely collapsing, kept her breathing, however shallowly. The waiter stood patiently, his silent presence an undeniable pressure, a constant, polite reminder of her predicament. She could feel his gaze, cool and impersonal, waiting for her to act, to produce a credit card, to find a solution, to make this awkward situation disappear. Her purse felt impossibly light on her lap, a cruel joke. Inside, there was a worn wallet containing a handful of crumpled bills, barely enough for bus fare home and a cheap meal for tomorrow. A miserable feast. Her credit cards were already maxed out, a testament to months of trying to keep up, to pretend she wasn't constantly teetering on the brink of financial ruin, to maintain a facade of normalcy. She had reached the limit, exhausted every avenue. She pictured her mother's tired smile, her thin, arthritic hands trembling as she held a teacup. Her eyes, though clouded with pain, still full of love for Emma. Her mother, who had sacrificed so much for Emma, who had always believed in her, who had instilled in her a sense of quiet dignity and resilience. The thought of the disappointment in her mother's eyes, not anger but a profound, weary sadness, was unbearable. This debt, this public humiliation, felt like a failure not just of herself, but of her duty to her mother, a betrayal of all the sacrifices made for her. A wave of self-recrimination washed over her, bitter and scalding. Why had she trusted him? Why had she allowed herself to be so vulnerable, so naive, so utterly foolish? She, who had always been so careful, so guarded, so wary of promises. The desperate need for connection, for a shared burden, for a moment of peace, had blinded her, had dulled her instincts. She had mistaken his superficial charm for genuine affection, his grand gestures for true commitment, his empty words for solid promises. Now she was paying the price, a price far steeper than any she could have imagined, a cost that threatened to consume her entirely. The rich, deep reds and golds of the restaurant's decor, the gleaming brass accents reflecting the soft, diffused lighting, all seemed to press in on her, suffocating her, stealing the air from her lungs. The air, thick with the scent of expensive food and perfume, suddenly felt heavy, cloying, like a velvet shroud slowly descending. She yearned for fresh air, for the anonymity of the bustling street outside, for anything that would allow her to breathe again, to escape this suffocating cage. But she couldn't move. She was paralyzed, pinned by the weight of the bill, by the silent expectation of the waiter, by the crushing reality of her abandonment, by the sheer impossibility of her situation. Her chest tightened further, making it difficult to draw a full breath, her lungs feeling constricted, unable to expand. Her vision blurred at the edges, and she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that the tears she had fought so hard to suppress were finally coming, betraying her. They welled up, hot and stinging, defying her will, blurring the cruel numbers on the bill, turning them into indistinct smudges of black ink. She squeezed her eyes shut for a brief moment, a desperate attempt to regain control, to push back against the overwhelming tide of despair, to gather her fractured self. When she opened them again, the world still felt wrong, distorted by her grief, by the lens of her profound sadness. Her gaze fell upon the empty chair again, a monument to his absence, to his betrayal, to the emptiness he had left behind. The smooth, polished wood seemed to gleam mockingly under the soft light, a silent testament to his flight. He had been there, laughing, making plans for next week, only an hour ago. Now only the ghost of his presence remained, along with this impossible, agonizing burden, this crushing debt. She was truly irrevocably alone, more alone than she had ever felt in her entire life. This was more than just a financial crisis. It was a crisis of spirit, a shattering of her most deeply held beliefs about trust and human connection, about her own worth. She had lost not only money but a piece of herself, a piece she might never get back, a faith in the goodness of others. Her future, which had always felt uncertain but at least open, now seemed to slam shut before her, a heavy iron gate clanging with finality. She saw only darkness ahead, a path strewn with impossible obstacles, a future devoid of any light. The waiter cleared his throat gently, a soft, polite sound that nevertheless pierced through her haze of despair like a sharp needle. It was a reminder that time was moving, that she couldn't simply sit here forever, frozen in her misery, that she had to face the music. She had to do something, anything, but her mind was completely blank, devoid of any viable options, any shred of hope. Her head felt heavy, aching with the strain of suppressed emotion and frantic, fruitless thought, a dull throb behind her eyes. Her hands, still clutching the edges of the billfolder, tightened their grip until her knuckles turned white, bone white against the dark leather. The paper felt like a burning ember, searing her fingertips, a tangible representation of her utter ruin, a physical manifestation of her destruction. The elegant script, the precise figures, each number a nail in the coffin of her hopes, a final, unyielding verdict. She looked down at it, her chin trembling almost imperceptibly, a small, involuntary movement she couldn't control. The soft jazz music, which had once been a soothing backdrop to her hopeful evening, now twisted into a discordant symphony of her own failure, each note a painful echo. It was a soundtrack to despair, playing just for her, in this room full of oblivious happiness. The weight of the world, of every single one of her burdens, seemed to settle on her chest, making it difficult to breathe, impossible to think clearly. And then, despite all her efforts, despite her fierce pride and her desperate need to hold herself together, to present a semblance of composure, a single tear escaped. It traced a hot, lonely path down her cold cheek, leaving a shimmering trail before it disappeared into the soft, worn fabric of her dress, a silent testament to her breaking point. It was a tear of pure, unadulterated despair, a testament to the fact that her life had, without a doubt, truly hit rock bottom. The Grand Bistro, a place of lavish dreams, had become the tomb of her last remaining hope. The low thrum of hushed conversations and the soft clinking of expensive silverware filled the Grand Bistro, a familiar backdrop to Jack Harrison's world. He sat at his usual corner table, a half-empty glass of amber liquid cooling slowly beside his impeccably polished plate. The aroma of truffles and roasted duck, typically a comfort, now felt heavy, almost suffocating. His gaze, usually sharp and sweeping, was fixed on the condensation collecting on his glass, his thumb idly tracing the cold, wet ring it left on the pristine white tablecloth. The vibration of his phone shattered the momentary peace. He answered, his voice a low, clipped tone. Harrison, Rashidi stated, his jaw tightening. The voice on the other end was frantic, tinny, a stark contrast to the quiet elegance surrounding him. Jack listened, his eyes closing for a brief, almost imperceptible moment. The words hit him like a cold wave. Merger, instability, family image, Peter Sterling. The name Sterling hung in the air, a venomous whisper, even across the phone line. Jack could almost taste the bitterness of it, like bile rising in his throat. This was not merely about numbers on a ledger. It was about the very foundation of his life, his legacy. He felt the familiar pressure building behind his eyes, a dull ache that had become his constant companion since his wife's passing. Every decision, every risk, now carried the added weight of Sarah's future, a precious burden he guarded fiercely. The merger, the culmination of years of relentless effort and strategic maneuvering, was teetering. The board, those vultures, demanded an image of stability, a solid front. A widower, however successful, was seen as vulnerable, his personal life too fractured to inspire confidence in a multi-billion-dollar acquisition. It was an archaic, maddening perspective, but it was the reality he faced. "He is twisting the narrative," the voice hissed, "portraying your single status as a liability. Sterling's people are relentless." Jack's grip on the phone tightened until his knuckles went white. He could envision Sterling's smirking face, the calculating gleam in his eyes, always ready to exploit any perceived weakness. The man was a predator, sensing blood in the water. Jack's company, Harrison Enterprises, was not just a business. It was the embodiment of generations of hard work, a monument to his family's ambition. To see it threatened by such petty, personal attacks was an insult, a betrayal. A wave of exhaustion washed over him, deep and bone-weary. The endless meetings, the late nights, the constant battle against rivals like Sterling, all of it was taking its toll. He looked around the opulent restaurant, seeing couples laughing, families celebrating, their lives seemingly carefree. A profound sense of loneliness, sharp and sudden, pierced through his carefully constructed composure. He was surrounded by people, yet utterly alone, carrying the weight of an empire on his shoulders. The scent of expensive perfume, normally a pleasant distraction, now felt cloying, a reminder of the social charade he was forced to maintain. His gaze drifted almost aimlessly across the room. He saw her then, a figure of stark solitude amidst the bustling glamour. She was a woman, perhaps in her late 20s, sitting alone at a table near the wall. Her light brown hair was pulled back simply, revealing a delicate face that seemed too pale, too still. She wore a dress that, while neat, lacked the obvious designer label of the other patrons. It was her posture that first caught his attention, a quiet slump, her shoulders slightly rounded, as if trying to shrink into herself. She held a piece of paper in her hand, her fingers clasped around it, trembling ever so slightly. A single tear, a luminous track, made its way down her cheek, catching the subtle light from the chandelier above. It was a silent, profound sorrow that seemed to emanate from her, a stark contrast to the lively conversations and cheerful laughter around her. The air around her seemed colder, stiller. She was an island in a sea of celebration, her despair a palpable thing, even from a distance. Jack's eyes, usually so focused on profit margins and acquisition targets, found themselves drawn to her, captivated by the raw, unguarded pain. He finished the phone call, his voice calmer now, masking the turmoil within. "Understood. We will find a solution. Keep Sterling's influence contained for now." He ended the call, placing the phone face down on the table, the small vibration a faint echo of the crisis. His eyes, however, did not return to his untouched dinner. They remained fixed on the woman across the room. He observed her closely, his mind, ever the strategist, beginning to sift through the data points. Her quiet suffering was not an act. It was too genuine, too deeply etched on her face. He saw the way she clutched the bill, the way her eyes, a striking blue even from this distance, seemed to hold an entire ocean of grief. She was not merely sad, she was utterly broken, abandoned. The empty chair opposite her was a silent testament to a recent departure, a cruel public humiliation. He knew that feeling of being abandoned, of facing an impossible situation alone. He had faced it in the sterile hospital room when his wife's heart finally gave out. A strange, almost clinical thought began to form in his mind, a cold, calculated idea born of desperation. He needed a stable image. He needed a fiancé, even if only for a short time, to appease the board and counter Sterling's insidious whispers. Someone discreet, someone who would understand the gravity of the situation, someone who, perhaps, had nothing left to lose. He needed someone whose desperation mirrored his own, albeit for vastly different reasons. His gaze swept over her again, taking in the slender build, the tired yet resilient flicker in her blue eyes. He pictured her in a different setting, perhaps at a gala, on his arm. Could she play the part? Could she project the illusion of stability, of domestic bliss that he so desperately needed? He saw the vulnerability, yes, but beneath it, he sensed a quiet strength, a determination born of survival. It was a risky thought, an audacious gamble, but his options were dwindling. The Grand Bistro, a place of luxury and fleeting joy, was about to become the crucible of an extraordinary transactional arrangement. He considered the implications. A woman in her position, clearly facing financial ruin, would likely be receptive to a substantial offer. It would be a temporary measure, a strategic alliance, devoid of any genuine emotion, purely a business transaction. He had learned long ago that emotions were a liability in his world. He had buried his own grief beneath layers of work and responsibility, and he expected the same professional detachment from any partner in this desperate charade. The memory of his late wife, a beautiful, vibrant woman, flickered through his mind. A wave of regret, sharp and poignant, washed over him. He wished she were still here, not just for himself, but for Sarah, for the company, for the stability she had always brought. But wishes were for fools. His mind raced, constructing the framework of the deal. A generous sum, enough to clear her debts. A contract, strict confidentiality clauses, a defined duration. He would protect her, ensure her anonymity once the arrangement concluded. It would be a clean break, a solution for both their predicaments, a temporary bridge over their respective abysses. The idea, initially a fleeting thought, solidified into a concrete plan, a lifeline in his sea of troubles. He knew it was unconventional, even shocking, but the stakes were too high for conventional solutions. The future of Harrison Enterprises, the legacy he was bound to uphold, demanded radical action. He watched her carefully, noting the way she finally pushed the bill away, her hands falling into her lap, her head bowed. The image of utter defeat. It tugged at something within him, a faint echo of his own despair. But he quickly suppressed it. Sentimentality was a luxury he could not afford. This was about survival for him and for his company. This woman, Emma Roberts, though he did not yet know her name, was a potential piece in his intricate game of corporate chess, a flicker of desperate resolve ignited in his eyes, cold and sharp. He needed a solution, and she, in her quiet, desperate sorrow, seemed to be it. He took a deep breath, the rich, buttery scent of the restaurant briefly filling his lungs before he pushed it away. He looked towards the entrance where his assistant, Mark, was discreetly waiting, having just entered after completing a brief errand. Jack raised his hand, a sudden, decisive gesture cutting through the air. His gaze, now steely and purposeful, returned to Emma, his mind already calculating the next move. A shadow fell across the white tablecloth. Emma felt a shift in the ambient light before she saw him. Her gaze lifted from the bill's impossible numbers. A tall figure stood beside her table, blocking the chandelier's soft glow. He wore a dark suit. His sharp gray eyes met hers directly. A scent of cologne and crisp linen reached her, a contrast to her despair. Her heart thumped hard. What did this man want? She felt exposed, adrift from being abandoned. Miss Roberts, I presume? His voice was deep and unwarm. It was a statement, not a question. He knew her, though she did not know him. A shiver of unease ran down her spine. The bistro's hum faded, leaving only silence. Her fingers tightened on her water glass. The cool crystal felt like a small anchor. Emma swallowed. Her throat was dry. Her humiliation, the unpaid bill, the empty chair, all magnified under his gaze. She had hit rock bottom. Now this stranger bore down with predatory intensity. She tried a polite response, but words caught in her throat. Yes, she finally whispered. She hated its small sound, how it betrayed her fragile composure. She wanted to shrink into the velvet seat, to disappear. His eyes saw through her, past her worn dress and facade. He did not smile or try to ease her. He observed her, his expression unreadable, with a calculated coolness. He pulled out the chair her partner had left empty and sat. His bold action stunned her silent. He filled the void with his presence. My name is Jack Harrison, he stated, his voice measured, controlled. No apology, no preamble. He stated his identity as a simple fact. Jack Harrison. She had heard the name, perhaps in a magazine. Her distress clouded the memory. He was important, which only deepened her discomfort. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table, bringing his intense gaze closer. The cologne scent grew, a sophisticated blend. I apologize for the unconventional approach, Miss Roberts, he began, but his tone held no real apology. Time is a luxury I currently do not possess. He paused, his words weighted with urgency. Emma was mesmerized by his audacity. Her mind raced for a reason. Was he linked to her partner? Another blow? The uncertainty was unbearable. She wanted to demand an explanation, to tell him to leave, but the words failed. Apprehension tightened in her stomach. I observed your situation tonight, Jack continued, his eyes flicking to the empty chair, then to her face. There was no pity, no judgment, just a clinical assessment. I believe I can offer a solution to your current difficulties. His blunt words stripped her pretense. He had seen her, vulnerable, abandoned, drowning in debt. Shame and indignation burned her cheeks. How dare he know her difficulties, offer a solution? A solution? Emma managed, her voice edged with a defiant tremor. Her blue eyes, usually worried, now sparked with anger. Mr. Harrison, my situation is not for public consumption, nor for solutions from strangers. She tried to sound haughty, desperate to reclaim dignity. Jack remained unmoved. His composure was absolute, impervious to her defense. On the contrary, Miss Roberts, he countered, your situation, unfortunate, aligns perfectly with a need of my own. He picked up a fork, turning it slowly, silver gleaming. A small, deliberate movement, a sign of control that mocked her chaos. He set the fork back down with a soft click, then met her gaze once more. I require a fiancé. The words hung heavy, absurd. Emma blinked. She must have misheard him. A fiancé? Her? The idea was so preposterous, a laugh almost escaped her. Was this a cruel joke, a final, elaborate humiliation from her ex? Her mind raced for an explanation. Found none. The soft jazz seemed distorted, a mocking soundtrack to this surreal encounter. A fiancé, she repeated. Disbelief laced her question. Her hands trembled, still on the water glass. Nausea washed over her. This could not be real. This man, in his expensive suit, offered a twisted proposition after her life imploded. Jack nodded, his eyes fixed on hers. A temporary arrangement, and of course, purely contractual, lasting until a business merger finalized. It is about projecting domestic stability, Miss Roberts, something I lack. He spoke with cool pragmatism, like a stock market transaction, devoid of emotion. He laid out the terms, his voice a low, steady drone that cut through her confusion. He needed someone for social events, to play a loving partner, to be seen as future Mrs. Harrison. The charade would be seamless, he assured her, carefully constructed with confidentiality clauses. It was a business deal, pure and simple, a temporary role-playing with a clear objective. Emma listened, her mind struggling with his proposition's audacity. Its transactional nature was insulting, yet tiny bit intriguing. Every fiber screamed outrage, rejecting being a prop in his corporate theater. But desperation whispered, was this worse than the abyss she faced? He continued, detailing duration, appearances, discretion. He spoke of maintaining appearances, convincing associates, rivals, investors of his stable life. A desperate undercurrent to his composed words hinted at immense pressure. She tasted the tension, a metallic tang. In exchange, Miss Roberts, Jack finally said, his voice dropping, more focused, I am prepared to offer you a sum of money to alleviate your financial burdens. He paused, words settling. Emma held her breath, not daring to hope, yet a spark of possibility ignited. Her mother, ailing with medical bills, flashed in her mind. Crushing debt, the eviction notice, haunted her. $2 million, he stated, the number delivered with precise, deliberate clarity. The world tilted. $2 million. The sound was a physical blow, a rush of blood, a roaring silence. Her grip on the glass loosened. It clinked softly. $2 million. It was an astronomical sum, beyond anything she conceived, felt fictional. Her breath hitched, a gasp trapped. Her eyes, wide with shock, searched his face for deception, for a joke. His face remained impassive, his gaze unwavering, betraying only calm resolve. The expensive suit, styled hair, deep voice, all coalesced into undeniable power and earnestness. He was entirely serious. $2 million. It meant her mother's medical bills paid in full. It meant a comfortable home, free from eviction. It meant an end to years of gnawing anxiety. It meant freedom, a dreamed-of life, now dangled like a golden key. But it came with a price incredibly high, and terrifyingly low. Her dignity, authenticity, herself, packaged as a lie. She would pretend, act, live a falsehood for a stranger's business deal. A profound unease, an internal tremor that threatened to shake her apart. Her heart pounded, a frantic drumbeat. The clinking glasses, the hum of conversation, the soft jazz, all returned, distant, filtered through glass. She felt the money's weight, its immense power, terrifying allure of its promise. It would wipe away her nightmares, offer a fresh start, a clean slate. A fresh start bought with a lie. Its absurdity, his cold, calculated proposal, clashed with her raw desperation. Outrage warred with a seductive possibility. Her pride screamed to reject it, to walk away, to keep her integrity. But her mother's weary face, looming debts, crushing helplessness, pulled her toward the offer's abyss. Emma stared at Jack, her mind reeling from his audacious offer, torn between outrage and the seductive escape from misery. The clatter of cutlery in the grand bistro faded to a distant hum. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Her mind spun with the impossibly large number Jack Harrison had just spoken, a sum that could erase years of crushing debt. It felt like a fever dream, too outlandish to be real. Yet here he sat, an undeniable presence across the elegant table, a fake fiancé. The words tasted like ash on her tongue. Her own reflection in the polished silver gleamed back at her, a pale, bewildered face. This was not her. This was some desperate stranger caught in a terrible play. How could she even consider such a monstrous deception? Her parents had raised her with integrity, with the belief that honesty was her most valuable possession. To lie, to pretend, to sell a version of herself for money, the thought alone made her stomach clench. It felt like a betrayal of everything she stood for, a surrender of her very soul. Yet a different kind of image burned behind her eyes, one far more potent than her ideals. It was the faded floral wallpaper of her mother's small room, the insistent beeping of the IV machine, the way her mother's hand felt thin and fragile in hers. She could still hear the doctor's calm, almost clinical voice explaining the increasing cost of the treatments, the need for specialized care, the bleak prognosis without it. Each word had been a hammer blow, each bill a fresh wound. Emma had worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, but it was never enough. The mountain of medical expenses grew faster than she could ever hope to chip away at it. A memory surfaced, sharp and painful. Her mother, barely able to speak, had whispered, "Don't worry, darling. Everything will be all right." But Emma knew it would not. She had seen the unspoken fear in her mother's eyes, the quiet resignation. And Emma had felt a cold, sharp terror herself, a fear far greater than any personal shame. It was the fear of losing the one person who had always loved her unconditionally, the fear of failing her completely. Her gaze drifted past Jack's composed face, out to the blurred streetlights beyond the restaurant window. What was pride worth when pitted against a mother's life? What was dignity when it meant watching someone you loved slip away, knowing you could have done something, anything, to prevent it? The question clawed at her, tearing at the carefully constructed walls of her moral resolve. She swallowed, the dryness in her throat making it difficult. The silence stretched between them, heavy and expectant. Jack watched her, his gray eyes unblinking, betraying nothing. He seemed to possess an endless well of patience, or perhaps he simply knew with a businessman's chilling certainty that she was trapped. "How long?" Emma asked, her voice a little hoarse, barely above a whisper. The question felt small, insignificant, yet it was the first crack in her wall of denial. She needed details, anchors in this swirling chaos. Jack's expression remained neutral. "Until the merger is finalized. It's projected to take 6 months, possibly a little longer. 7 months at most. 7 months. An eternity, yet a blink of an eye in the context of her mother's future." Emma tried to visualize it. 6 months of pretending, of living a life that wasn't hers, of being someone else. Could she do it? Could she maintain such a charade for so long? The thought made her skin prickle. "And what exactly would I have to do?" she continued, pushing past the initial wave of nausea. She needed to understand the full extent of this bizarre proposal, to find a reason, any reason, to refuse him. Her mind searched for a loophole, a hidden clause, a demand so outrageous she could walk away with her conscience intact. Jack leaned forward slightly, his movements precise, almost clinical. You would portray my fiancé. This involves public appearances, attending social events, perhaps some corporate functions where a stable family image is crucial. You would reside at the Harrison estate for the duration of the agreement. Reside at the Harrison estate. The words conjured images of sprawling mansions, servants, a world so far removed from her cramped apartment she could barely conceive it. It felt like stepping into a gilded cage. The air around her suddenly felt heavy, thick with the scent of expensive perfume and foreign food. She could feel the plush velvet beneath her fingers, a luxurious texture she did not belong to. And physical contact? Emma asked, her voice barely audible. This was the part that truly unsettled her, the boundary she was most afraid to cross. The thought of being touched by this stranger, even in pretense, sent a shiver down her spine. It was one thing to act, it was another to endure. Jack's eyes met hers, and for a fleeting moment, she thought she saw a flicker of something unreadable, perhaps even discomfort, before his usual composure settled back into place. Limited and appropriate, within the bounds of a publicly engaged couple. Hand-holding, an arm around the waist, perhaps a brief kiss on the cheek for photographs. Nothing more than what is necessary to maintain the illusion. His voice was even, devoid of any warmth. He laid out the terms as if discussing a business deal, which, she reminded herself, was precisely what this was. Emma looked down at her hands, clasped tightly on the tablecloth. Her fingernails pressed into her palms, a small, self-inflicted pain. This was a deal. She was a commodity, a very expensive commodity, but a commodity nonetheless. The shame returned, hotter this time, burning through her veins. But then, the image of her mother, frail and struggling, pushed through the shame again, a powerful undertow pulling her deeper. "What about my life?" she asked, looking up again, a spark of defiance in her eyes. "My friends, my family, my job." She had no job now, of course, but he didn't know that. It was a reflex, a desperate attempt to cling to some semblance of her old self. Jack considered her question for a moment. "Your existing life will need to be adjusted. Publicly, you will be my fiancé. This will necessitate a certain level of commitment and discretion. Your friends will need to understand your new role. Your family will require a credible explanation for your sudden engagement to a man like me." He paused. "As for your job, it would be best if you ceased employment for the duration. It would avoid complications and allow you to focus entirely on this arrangement." Cease employment, it was almost laughable. She had no job to cease. Her current reality was a tangled mess of broken promises and mounting bills. The words felt like another layer of the elaborate lie she would have to construct. But this lie, unlike the others, offered a lifeline. "And the money?" Emma asked, her voice regaining a little strength. It was crass, she knew, but it was the core of this transaction, the desperate heart of her dilemma. "The amount you mentioned, is that real?" Jack nodded, his gaze steady. "It is. Half upon signing the contract, the remainder upon the successful completion of the merger. It's a substantial sum, Emma, enough to clear your debts and provide financial security for yourself and your family." The cold, hard facts of the money washed over her, chilling and intoxicating all at once. Enough to clear her debts, enough to pay for her mother's treatments, enough to wipe away the suffocating fear that had been her constant companion for months. It was a tangible solution to an insurmountable problem. It was salvation. He reached into the inner pocket of his finely tailored jacket and withdrew a slim, dark leather folder. He placed it gently on the table between them. "The terms are all outlined here, in the faux engagement contract. It's a comprehensive document. I recommend you read it thoroughly." Emma stared at the folder, her eyes tracing the clean, unembellished lines of its cover. It looked official, unyielding, a testament to the gravity of what he was proposing. It wasn't just a verbal agreement. It was a legally binding document, a formal commitment to a lie. Her breath hitched in her chest. A sudden, sharp memory pierced through her current state of shock. It was the afternoon her mother had collapsed. The frantic call to the emergency services, the wailing siren, the desperate plea for help. Emma had stood by, helpless, watching her mother's strength ebb away, feeling utterly powerless. That feeling of powerlessness had been her constant companion ever since. This offer, however unsavory, offered power. It offered the power to help, to save, to protect. She picked up the folder, her fingers trembling slightly as they brushed against the cool leather. The weight of it in her hands felt immense, symbolic of the weight pressing down on her entire life. She opened it slowly, her eyes scanning the dense legal jargon, the clauses and subclauses, each word meticulously chosen to define the parameters of their bizarre agreement. It was all there: confidentiality, public conduct, duration, compensation, penalties for breach. A life laid out on paper, a theatrical performance with devastatingly real stakes. The restaurant around her seemed to become impossibly loud again. The gentle hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, the soft jazz music all assaulting her senses. She felt exposed, vulnerable, as if everyone in the room knew the impossible choice laid before her. Her stomach churned, a knot of anxiety tightening with each line she read. Her mind was a battleground. On one side stood her conscience, her upbringing, the deep-seated belief in honesty and authenticity. On the other, the stark, brutal reality of her financial ruin, her mother's failing health, the desperate, clawing need for relief. She imagined her mother's tired smile, the way her eyes would light up at the prospect of proper care, of comfort, of simply not having to worry. Could she deny her mother that for the sake of her own pride? She looked up from the contract, her eyes searching Jack's face for any hint of softness, any sign that this was a joke, a test. But his expression remained impassive, a mask of calm determination. He was a man who saw solutions, who made decisions, who brokered deals. And she, Emma Roberts, was simply another variable in his complex equation. He offered a clear path out of her misery, a path paved with deceit, but a path nonetheless. With a heavy sigh, Emma looked from the contract to Jack's unyielding gaze, a silent war raging within her as she weighed her pride against survival. The sleek silver pen lay on the polished mahogany, a silent, weighty invitation. Emma's gaze drifted from the fine print of the faux engagement contract to the glinting metal object. Every word on the page had burned into her mind, a stark blueprint of the lie she was about to embody. Her heart thumped a slow, heavy rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of her own desperate surrender. She could feel the blood pulsing in her fingertips, a faint tremor that was impossible to suppress. The air in the Grand Bistro, once thick with the scent of expensive perfume and exotic spices, now tasted metallic, like fear. She imagined the tiny fibers of the paper beneath her signature, each one absorbing a piece of her pride, her dignity. Was this truly the only way out? The image of her mother's pale, tired face, framed by hospital white, flashed behind her eyes. That silent plea for life, for health, was a heavier weight than any contract. Jack remained still, a statue of quiet expectation across the table. His gray eyes, sharp and unwavering, watched her. There was no impatience in his posture, only an unsettling calm that spoke of absolute certainty. He knew she would sign. He had measured her desperation with an almost cruel precision. A wave of resentment, hot and bitter, washed over Emma, quickly followed by the chilling realization that he was right. She had no other choice. Her breath hitched, a tiny, almost inaudible sound. She felt the warmth of a tear welling, but she fought it back, clenching her jaw. Not here, not now, not in front of this man who held her future, however artificial, in his hands. She extended her arm slowly as if moving through thick water, her fingers still trembling, brushed against the cool metal of the pen. It felt strangely light, yet capable of crushing her under its weight. The subtle scent of Jack's expensive cologne, a clean, woody aroma, reached her as she leaned forward. It was a scent that spoke of power and meticulous grooming, a world entirely alien to her own. She picked up the pen, her grip tighter than necessary, the plastic barrel digging slightly into her skin. The urge to flee, to simply run out of this opulent prison and back into the familiar misery of her old life, was almost overwhelming. But where would she go? To what empty apartment? with what stack of impossible bills. She placed the tip of the pen on the signature line. The ink, a deep, rich black, seemed to bleed onto the crisp white paper. The sound it made, a faint scratch, echoed in the sudden, cavernous silence of her mind. Emma Roberts. Her name. The name she had carried through 28 years of quiet struggles, of small joys, of growing disappointments. Now it was being etched onto a document that would change everything, twisting her identity into something she barely recognized. Each letter was a deliberate effort, a testament to the internal battle still raging. Her hand, usually steady, felt clumsy, almost rebellious. She watched the loops and lines form, a permanent mark on a temporary agreement. When the last letter was complete, she lifted the pen, her muscles aching with the effort. A strange, hollow emptiness settled in her chest, a void where her defiance had once resided. It was done. The decision, so agonizingly made, was now solidified, irreversible. She looked up, meeting Jack's gaze. His expression remained unreadable, a carefully constructed mask that betrayed no triumph, no pity. Was he satisfied? Had she played her part well enough? She wondered if he saw the raw vulnerability still clinging to her, the faint sheen in her eyes that spoke of unshed tears. He simply nodded, a slight, almost imperceptible dip of his head. It was a gesture of acknowledgement, of a transaction completed. Then, with a smooth, unhurried motion, Jack reached into the inner pocket of his finely tailored jacket. He produced a small, velvet-covered box, dark and elegant. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She had read about this in the contract, a necessary prop, a physical manifestation of their charade. But seeing it now in his hand made it terrifyingly real. Her eyes fixed on the box, a growing knot of apprehension tightening in her stomach. He pushed the box across the table towards her. It slid silently, coming to rest directly in front of her. The velvet felt plush beneath her hesitant fingers when she touched it, a stark contrast to the cold, hard reality of her situation. She looked at Jack, a silent question in her gaze. He gave another small nod, an unspoken instruction. With trembling fingers, Emma lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of white satin, lay the Harrison engagement ring. It was magnificent, even more so than she had imagined. A large, brilliant cut diamond caught the ambient light, scattering it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. Flanking it were two smaller, deep blue sapphires, like watchful eyes. It wasn't merely a piece of jewelry, it was a small sculpture, a testament to generations of wealth and tradition. It sparkled with an almost blinding intensity, a beacon of a life she could only dream of, yet was now impossibly about to inhabit. A gasp escaped her lips, soft and involuntary. The sheer opulence of it felt almost obscene against the backdrop of her own recent destitution. This ring, this symbol of love and commitment, was about to become the cornerstone of her biggest lie. She felt a strange mixture of awe and profound sadness. This beautiful object, designed to signify eternal devotion, would for her represent a temporary, transactional agreement. She reached out, her fingers hovering over the precious stones. They looked cold, perfect, untouchable. Her own hands, worn and sometimes calloused from years of doing everything herself, felt out of place. Jack's voice, low and steady, broke the silence. This is a family heirloom, Emma. It has been passed down through generations of Harrison wives. His words were devoid of sentiment, a mere recitation of fact. But they carried an implicit weight, a reminder of the heritage she was now, however falsely, stepping into. The responsibility of it, even as a charade, felt immense. Her mind raced, trying to grasp the implications. This ring wasn't just a prop. It was a piece of history. A history she was now desecrating with her deception. A pang of guilt, sharp and unexpected, pierced through her. But then the image of her mother's weary smile returned, pushing away the guilt. This was for her. This was survival. Emma carefully, almost reverently, took the ring from its satin bed. The diamond felt surprisingly cool against her skin. It was heavier than she expected, a solid, tangible weight that seemed to press down on her palm. She held it for a moment, letting its presence sink in. The intricate platinum band felt smooth and cool, a stark contrast to the warmth of her own flesh. She slid it onto the ring finger of her left hand. It fit perfectly, snug but not tight. The diamond, now sitting proudly on her finger, seemed to pulse with its own light. She turned her hand slightly, watching the facets catch the light, the sapphires gleaming. It was beautiful, undeniably so, but it felt alien, a foreign object adorning her hand. Her eyes met Jack's again, seeking some flicker of emotion, some hint of what this meant to him. But his gaze remained as impenetrable as ever. He simply observed, a man assessing the execution of a plan. Her heart still throbbed, but now it was a different kind of beat, a frantic flutter of anticipation and dread. The journey had truly begun. The heavy, cold weight of the Harrison engagement ring on Emma's finger felt like both a promise of salvation and a brand of her new, elaborate lie. The polished oak doors of the Harrison estate swung open, revealing a world Emma had only glimpsed in magazines. Her small, worn suitcase felt impossibly light in her hand, almost an insult to the grandeur that lay before her. The air inside smelled of beeswax and expensive cut flowers, a scent completely foreign to her own cramped apartment. She walked across the marble foyer, her footsteps echoing faintly, each sound amplifying the chasm between who she was and who she was pretending to be. A uniformed housekeeper greeted her with a polite, practiced smile. Emma felt a blush creep up her neck, unsure how to respond to such formal deference. She was led through vast rooms filled with antique furniture and priceless art, each piece whispering tales of generations of Harrison wealth. Her room, or rather the guest suite that was now hers, was larger than her entire previous living space. A massive four-poster bed stood draped in silk, and a window overlooked manicured gardens, a landscape of perfect green that seemed unreal. She touched the cool silk sheets, then her own rough hands, a stark comparison. This opulent cage, she thought, was a gilded prison for her pride. Days melted into a blur of preparation. Jack had scheduled a series of training sessions. They were not about business, but about their fabricated life together. He sat across from her in a cavernous study, a thick binder of information laid out between them. He spoke in calm, measured tones, detailing their invented history. "We met through a mutual friend at a gallery opening," he began, his gray eyes piercing, a chance encounter that sparked an immediate connection. Emma nodded, trying to absorb every detail of the elaborate lie. She felt a strange mix of fascination and fear. He described their first dates, the shared interests they supposedly discovered, the quiet evenings spent together. He spoke of love and affection with the precision of a corporate presentation. Emma found herself studying his face, searching for any flicker of emotion, but his expression remained carefully neutral. It was a performance, she knew, but a convincing one. His voice, deep and resonant, filled the quiet room, painting a picture of a romance that existed only on paper. She focused on the rhythm of his words, letting them wash over her, a strange lullaby of deception. "You admire abstract art," he stated, his finger tracing a line on the page. "You find beauty in unexpected places." Emma almost laughed. She found beauty in a hot meal and a roof that did not leak. But she simply murmured her agreement, forcing a small smile. She practiced stories about his daughter Sarah, whom she had not yet met, and anecdotes about his business, which she barely understood. The words felt alien on her tongue, heavy with the weight of invention. Then came the more difficult part, the physical charade. "We need to appear genuinely affectionate," Jack explained, his gaze unwavering. Casual touches, lingering glances, nothing overtly dramatic, but enough to convey intimacy. Emma's breath hitched in her throat. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks. The idea of faking affection with this formidable man, a stranger, made her skin prickle. Her hands tightened into fists beneath the table. He demonstrated, reaching across the table to briefly cover her hand with his. His touch was firm, warm, and utterly impersonal. It was a purely functional gesture. Yet a jolt ran through Emma. She quickly pulled her hand away, her heart beginning to pound. "I understand," she managed, her voice a whisper. The air between them suddenly felt thick, charged with unspoken awkwardness. This was far more challenging than memorizing a fake biography. The night of the charity gala arrived. A whirlwind of stylists and makeup artists transforming Emma all into a vision she barely recognized. The gown, a shimmering sapphire blue, flowed around her like water, clinging in all the right places. Diamonds, not the Harrison ring, but borrowed pieces, glittered at her neck and wrists. She stared at her reflection, seeing a stranger with perfectly styled hair and expertly applied makeup, a woman who looked like she belonged. Yet, beneath the expensive facade, the familiar knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. Jack met her at the foot of the grand staircase. He looked impossibly handsome in a tailored tuxedo, his dark hair gleaming under the chandeliers. His eyes, usually cool and discerning, widened almost imperceptibly as he took her in. A flicker, she thought, a brief moment of genuine surprise. "You look stunning, Emma," he said, his voice a low murmur that sent a shiver down her spine. It was the first compliment he had offered, and it felt unexpectedly potent. He offered her his arm, and she hesitantly took it. His sleeve was smooth, his arm strong. She could feel the subtle tension in his muscles, mirroring her own. As they descended the stairs, a hush fell over the assembled guests. All eyes turned to them. Emma felt 100 gazes pierce through her, each one a silent question, a whispered judgment. She kept her chin high, remembering Jack's instruction. "Confidence, Emma. You are my fiancée. You belong here." The ballroom was a dazzling spectacle of lights, laughter, and a low hum of conversation. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead, reflecting in polished floors. The scent of exotic flowers mingled with expensive cologne and perfume. Emma gripped Jack's arm tighter, her palms damp. She could feel the weight of the Harrison ring on her finger, a constant physical reminder of her lie. Every smile she offered felt forced, every polite greeting the performance. She heard snippets of conversation as they moved through the crowd. "Jack Harrison is engaged? So sudden. Who is she? I've never seen her before. She seems quiet." The whispers were like tiny daggers, each one finding its mark. She fought the urge to shrink, to disappear into the lavish decor. Jack, ever composed, introduced her with a warm, possessive tone, his hands subtly resting at her elbow. "My fiancée, Emma Roberts," he would say, and she would offer her most practiced, serene smile. He guided her through the labyrinth of tables, pausing to exchange pleasantries with influential guests. Emma marveled at his effortless charm, the way he navigated the social currents with such ease. He was a master of this world, and she was merely an actress playing a role in his grand production. She found herself trying to mimic his calm demeanor, his subtle nods, his polite laughter. It was exhausting, a constant battle against her own discomfort. At one point, a woman with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and an equally perfect smile engaged Jack in a lengthy conversation about a recent business deal. Emma stood beside him, feeling utterly invisible, a prop in their polite exchange. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in the shimmering gowns, the impeccably dressed men, the dazzling jewels. She felt a pang of loneliness, a profound sense of not belonging, despite the diamonds on her neck and the famous ring on her finger. Jack, sensing her quiet withdrawal, subtly squeezed her hand. It was a brief, comforting gesture, a silent reminder that she was not alone in this charade. She looked up at him, and for a fleeting moment, she saw not the calculating CEO, but a man who understood the weight of expectation. His eyes, usually so guarded, held a hint of shared weariness. The moment passed quickly, replaced by his polite smile for the blonde woman. Later, as they navigated a particularly dense crowd near the main stage, Jack leaned in close to whisper in her ear, his breath warm against her skin. "Smile, my dear," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. "They are all watching." His proximity was disorienting. She could smell his distinct cologne, a sophisticated scent of cedar and something fresh. Her heart gave an involuntary lurch. This was part of the act, she reminded herself, just another instruction. He then moved his hand, almost imperceptibly, from her elbow to the small of her back. His touch was light, yet incredibly firm, a subtle pressure that guided her through the throng of people. A sudden, unexpected warmth spread through Emma, not just from the contact, but from something deeper, something that resonated within her. It was a jolt, a current that raced through her veins, leaving her breathless. Her mind, so focused on the charade, suddenly went blank. The chatter of the room faded into a distant hum. She felt a tremor run through her, an unsettling awareness of his presence, his strength, the unexpected intimacy of that single touch. It was not merely physical, it was as if an unseen boundary had been crossed, a silent acknowledgement of something beyond their carefully constructed agreement. Her skin tingled where his hand rested, a warmth that was both comforting and terrifying. Emma's breath hitched, her gaze fixed on the dazzling lights above, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The charade, she realized with a sudden, unsettling clarity, felt far too real in that moment. Emma felt the cool morning air of the Harrison estate. Her silk robe felt borrowed as she descended the grand staircase. Coffee led her to the dining room. Sunlight streamed through windows, making the place feel like a museum. Jack sat at the mahogany table, deep in documents. He offered a curt good morning. Emma's heart tightened. She felt an intruder. "Good morning, Papa," Sarah, Jack's daughter, said, entering. Emma felt nervous. Sarah's gray eyes flickered to Emma, then quickly away. Sarah sat opposite her father, eyes on her pancakes. Emma sensed the child's wariness. "Sarah, this is Emma," Jack said neutrally. "She will be staying here." Emma offered a hesitant smile. Sarah nodded, scraping her fork. Silence felt heavy. Emma gripped her coffee cup, trying to speak. "Those look delicious, Sarah," Emma ventured. "Did you make them?" Sarah looked up, surprised, shook her head. "Cook Margaret did." Her voice was soft. Emma saw a small, carved wooden bird in Sarah's hand. "That's a beautiful bird," Emma said gently. "Is it special?" Sarah looked at her. "My mama gave it to me." Sadness resonated. Emma understood the wooden bird was a memory. "She must have been wonderful to give such a gift," Emma replied. Sarah's eyes widened. No one spoke of her mother like that. Jack paused his reading. Emma felt warmth, a small victory connecting with Sarah. That afternoon, Emma found Sarah in the Harrison Gardens. She tried drawing a butterfly, but it looked clumsy. Emma knelt beside her. "That's tricky," Emma remarked. Sarah jumped, still guarded. "It won't look right," Sarah mumbled. Emma pointed to a flower. "Look at the colors first. It helps." Emma took a blue pencil. "Light makes edges glow even on dark wings." She added blue. The clumsy moth gained beauty. Sarah watched, fascinated. A tiny smile touched Sarah's face. "It's better," she said it stronger. "Thank you." Emma felt quiet joy. This felt more honest than any moment with Jack. Sarah looked at Emma's ring. "Are you going to marry Papa?" she asked. Guilt stung Emma. The lie loomed. "Yes," Emma said, voice steady. "We plan to." She found words carefully. "Your father and I are getting to know each other." Sarah nodded, processing, then drew. Emma stayed. For a moment, she forgot her troubles. The next week brought tension. Jack and Emma attended an industry gala. The ballroom shimmered with velvet and gold. Voices murmured, flutes clinked, perfume filled the air. Emma wore an emerald gown. She felt elegant yet exposed, clinging to Jack's arm. Her fixed smile met every gaze. An unsettling voice cut through the chatter. "Jack Harrison, always a pleasure." Peter Sterling, Jack's rival, appeared with a smirk. His cold eyes swept Emma, lingering on the ring. Emma felt a chill, recoiling. Sterling savored discomfort. "Peter," Jack responded smoothly, tightening his hand on Emma's arm. "May I introduce my fiancée, Emma Roberts?" Sterling extended a firm hand. "Miss Roberts," he purred, an unexpected, delightful surprise, a sudden development in Jack's predictable life. His eyes held a chilling glint. Emma knew the veiled threat. "Life is full of surprises, Mr. Sterling," Emma replied steadily. She refused intimidation. Sterling's smirk widened. "Indeed, especially to secure assets. A new partner brings perspective or distraction." His words were for Jack, but his gaze fixed on Emma, making her a pawn. Jack shielded Emma. "My engagement is personal, Peter. My business dealings are separate." His tone was firm. Sterling chuckled. "Everything connects in our world. Past, present, future plans. It weaves together." He sipped champagne. A shame for inconvenient truths to unravel a narrative, especially for Harrison Enterprises. Cold dread settled in Emma's stomach. Sterling threatened to expose their charade. He knew their secret. The ballroom's warmth felt oppressive. Her gown felt like chains. Fear tasted metallic. Jack stayed calm, but Emma felt his tension. His jaw clenched. "Are you suggesting something, Peter?" Jack asked softly, with steel. Sterling smiled, malicious. "One should ensure solid foundations, Jack, especially for a merger and a new family." He bowed mockingly to Emma, then vanished, leaving unease. Emma looked at Jack, heart pounding. "He knows," she whispered. "He knows about the fake engagement." Jack exhaled. "He suspects, Emma. Sterling is a shark. He'll use weakness to derail the merger." Jack's guarded eyes showed raw frustration. Emma felt fear and protective anger. This was about Jack's legacy, his daughter, everything. The gala's unease lingered. In the drawing room, quiet felt heavy. Lamps did little to dispel tension. Emma, still in her gown, felt its weight. She watched Jack pour whiskey, his back turned. Silence stretched, thick. "He could ruin everything, couldn't he?" Emma said, trembling. "Sterling could expose us." Jack turned, his gray eyes shadowed, weary. "He will try. We must be flawless. No mistakes." His clipped tone stung Emma. She felt indignation, sacrificing her pride for his business. "Flawless?" Emma retorted, her voice rising. "I am trying, Jack. I felt like a fraud tonight. Everyone staring. I pretended, smiled, nodded, while Sterling dissected us." Tears welled, blinked away. "I'm not used to this world." Jack swallowed his drink. "You need to be better, Emma. Stronger. This merger means everything. My company, my legacy, Sarah's future, all balance here." His low voice, a desperate growl, lashed her composure. "Better?" Emma's voice held anger. "I gave up my life for this, Jack. I became your puppet, your accessory. I play a role I never asked for, wearing a ring like a chain." She gestured to the diamond. "Is this easy? To pretend love for a man who treats me like a transaction?" Her breath hitched. Jack's eyes hardened. "You signed the contract, Emma. You knew the terms. I offered a way out, a chance to rebuild. Don't pretend victimhood." His cold words cut, aimed at her desperation and debt. Emma gasped. The air felt thin. "A way out?" she spat, voice trembling with fury. "You bought me, Jack? You paid to lease my life, my dignity. Don't imply I'm ungrateful. I know my price." Her eyes blazed with wounded pride. "I have burdens you cannot imagine." "And you think I don't have burdens, Emma?" Jack countered, his voice rising, his facade cracking. He slammed his glass down. "My life is no fairy tale. My wife is gone. My daughter lost her mother. My company faces hostile takeover. I carry that weight daily." His eyes burned. Emma stared, stunned by his raw honesty, his intense pain. She saw his grief, a man alone with unbearable weight. Her own hurt was too fresh. "And you think I don't understand loss?" she challenged fiercely. "I watched my mother fade, helpless, drowning in bills. I know impossible burdens. Don't lecture me." The room crackled with resentments, sorrows colliding. A tear traced Emma's cheek. She was tired of pretending, being strong, feeling like a ghost. "I can't do this anymore tonight," she said, her voice thick. "I can't pretend." She turned, her gown swishing, and walked to the door. Her hand reached the doorknob. She paused, glancing back. Jack stood by the table, slumped, face weary. His eyes met hers. Emma saw not anger, but deep, aching pain, mirroring her own. It was a vulnerability she had not expected, a shared burden. She wondered if their forced proximity forged a bond. She fled, leaving him alone. The grand staircase felt impossibly wide and silent beneath Emma's feet. The echo of her own footsteps seemed to mock the quiet fury that still hummed beneath her skin. Jack's harsh words from earlier had stung, a fresh wound on top of old ones. But the flicker of pain she had seen in his eyes remained a persistent, confusing image. She had retreated to her temporary sanctuary, the opulent guest bedroom, but sleep offered no solace. The vastness of the estate, usually a comfort, now felt like an empty chasm. She found herself drifting through the moonlit corridors drawn by an unseen pull. A soft, almost imperceptible light spilled from under the door to Jack's study. Curiosity, or perhaps a subconscious need to understand the man who had so drastically altered her life, guided her steps. She hesitated at the threshold, the rich scent of old leather and fine wood filling her nostrils. The air felt heavy, charged with a profound melancholy. Through the slightly ajar door, she saw him. Jack sat slumped in his large executive chair, his back to her, a single lamp casting a warm, solitary glow over his shoulders. His usually impeccable posture was gone, replaced by a weariness that twisted something inside Emma. His head was bowed, and in his hands he held a small, silver-framed photograph. The quiet reverence of his posture spoke volumes, silencing any lingering resentment Emma might have felt. She watched as he gently traced the image with his thumb, a gesture so tender, so utterly vulnerable, that it caught her breath in her throat. The silver frame glinted softly in the lamplight. He sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 unspoken sorrows. Emma could not see the image, but she did not need to. She knew it was his late wife. A profound understanding settled over Emma. This was not the ruthless CEO, the man who dealt in contracts and coal business. This was a man stripped bare by grief, aching with a loss that time could not heal. She felt a profound empathy, a recognition of her own deep-seated loneliness mirroring his. The air in the room seemed to thicken with unspoken pain, a shared sorrow that transcended their superficial arrangement. She saw the tremor in his hand as he brought the photograph closer to his chest, almost as if trying to physically absorb the image. Emma's heart ached with a sudden, unexpected pang. She knew what that kind of grief felt like, the hollow ache in the chest, the constant presence of an absence. Her own losses, though different, had carved similar voids. She wanted to turn away, to respect his private moment, but a strange compulsion held her rooted to the spot. The silence was broken only by the soft creak of the floorboards as he shifted, drawing a ragged breath. She saw the subtle tension in his jaw, the slight clench of his fingers around the photograph. He lowered the photo, placing it carefully on the polished surface of his desk. His gaze remained fixed on it, lost in a memory she could only guess at. His shoulders, usually so broad and confident, seemed to carry an invisible burden. The quiet atmosphere of the room was punctuated by the distant chime of a grandfather clock downstairs, marking the slow passage of a lonely night. She noticed a faint sheen of moisture in his eyes, catching the lamplight, a testament to the raw, untamed grief that still lived within him. Emma retreated silently, her own thoughts a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The argument from earlier now seemed trivial, overshadowed by the stark reality of his pain. She felt a strange protectiveness toward him, a desire to shield him from the suffering she had just witnessed. It was a feeling she had not anticipated, a warmth blooming in her chest that felt both foreign and deeply familiar. The opulent estate, once a cold prison, now seemed to hold a fragile, shared vulnerability. Later that night, or perhaps in the early hours of dawn, a faint cry pierced the deep silence of the mansion. Emma stirred from a fitful sleep, her senses immediately alert. Another cry, louder this time, filled with childlike distress. It was Sarah. Emma's instincts took over. She threw off the covers, her bare feet meeting the cold marble floor as she rushed toward the sound. The cries were coming from the room adjacent to hers, Sarah's bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, revealing a dim nightlight, casting soft shadows across the room. Sarah was sitting upright in her bed, her small body trembling, her face streaked with tears. "Mama," she whimpered, her voice tiny and raw with fear. Emma's heart constricted. She hurried to the bedside, her hand instinctively reaching out to stroke the child's hair. The soft silk of Sarah's blanket felt cool beneath Emma's fingers. "Sarah, what is it, sweetie?" Emma asked softly, her voice gentle and soothing. The room smelled faintly of lavender and a child's clean innocence. Sarah buried her face in Emma's shoulder, her small arms clinging tightly. "A monster," she sobbed, her voice muffled against Emma's nightgown. Emma held her close, rocking her gently, murmuring reassurances. She felt the rapid beat of the child's heart against her own. She smoothed Sarah's hair, her gaze sweeping the room for anything that might have triggered the nightmare. The shadows from the nightlight danced on the walls, transforming familiar objects into frightening shapes. Emma hummed a quiet tune, a lullaby her own mother used to sing, feeling the tension slowly ease from Sarah's small frame. The child's breathing began to steady, her sobs subsiding into hiccoughs. Just then the door opened wider, and Jack appeared, his face etched with concern. He was dressed in a dark robe, his hair slightly disheveled, clearly having been roused from sleep. The scent of him, faint and masculine, filled the air. His eyes, usually so guarded, held a raw anxiety as he took in Sarah's tear-streaked face. He saw Emma holding his daughter, a picture of quiet comfort. "What happened, Princess?" he asked, his voice softer than Emma had ever heard it. He moved closer, his presence filling the small space. Sarah whimpered again, clinging to Emma. Emma looked up at Jack, offering him a reassuring smile. "Just a bad dream," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "A monster," she said. Jack knelt by the bed, his hand reaching out to touch Sarah's arm. His touch was hesitant, almost uncertain. Emma shifted, allowing Jack to come closer, but Sarah did not release her. It was a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but Jack noticed. He saw the genuine care in Emma's eyes, the way she held his daughter so naturally. A flicker of something unreadable passed across his face, a blend of relief and perhaps a touch of awe. The moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. "It's okay, sweetheart," Jack murmured, his voice laced with tenderness. "Daddy's here. Emma's here." He looked at Emma, a silent question in his eyes, a request for help that he could not voice. Emma understood. She continued to stroke Sarah's hair, whispering soft words until the child's eyelids grew heavy. The tension in Jack's shoulders began to relax, his features softening. Finally, Sarah's breathing became even, her grip on Emma's nightgown loosening. She was fast asleep, nestled safely between the two adults. Emma carefully eased herself away, pulling the blanket gently over Sarah's shoulders. The warmth of the child's body still lingered against her. Jack watched her every move, his expression unreadable, but the anxiety had left his eyes. They held something akin to gratitude. They stepped out of the room, leaving the door ajar, and walked down the quiet hallway toward the kitchen. The house was still, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator. The scent of brewing coffee began to fill the air as Jack started the machine. Emma felt a strange intimacy in the shared silence, a bond forged in the quiet act of comforting a child. She leaned against the counter, the cool marble a stark contrast to the warmth that had bloomed in her chest. "Thank you," Jack said, his voice low and sincere. He turned to face her, a mug of steaming coffee in his hand, offering her one. She usually calls for me." Emma took the mug, feeling the warmth seep into her fingers. "It's all right," she replied, looking down at the swirling dark liquid. "Sometimes a different presence can be calming." She felt a blush creep up her neck, embarrassed by the sudden intimacy of the moment. The air between them felt different, less charged with the transactional nature of their agreement, more with a shared human experience. The quiet hum of the coffee maker was the only sound for a moment. Emma looked up, meeting his gaze. His gray eyes, usually so sharp and analytical, held a softness she had not seen before, a reflection of the vulnerability she had witnessed earlier in his study. She felt a pull, an unspoken invitation. "I saw you earlier," Emma confessed, her voice barely a whisper. She watched his expression carefully, half expecting him to stiffen, to revert to his guarded persona. He did not. Instead, a shadow passed over his features, a familiar cloud of sorrow. "The photograph," she clarified, her gaze dropping to her coffee mug again. The steam rose, tickling her nose. He sighed, a deep, weary sound that echoed the one she had heard earlier. "Yes," he said simply, his voice rough. "Eleanor." His wife's name hung in the air between them, a fragile, painful presence. Emma felt a wave of empathy wash over her. She imagined the beautiful woman in the photograph, the life they must have shared, the sudden, brutal rupture of it. The quiet sorrow in his eyes was almost unbearable. "She was a wonderful woman," Jack continued, his voice distant, lost in memory. "Kind, brilliant. The world felt brighter with her in it." He took a slow sip of his coffee, his gaze fixed on some point beyond Emma, beyond the kitchen walls. "Sarah looked so much like her. It's a constant reminder of what I lost. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of deep frustration and pain. Emma listened, her own heart stirring with a profound sadness that was not entirely her own. She understood the weight of those words. Losing someone you love, Emma began, her voice soft. It changes you in ways you can't predict. The silence is the loudest part. She thought of her own mother whose health was fading, and the fear of that inevitable silence. The fear that spurred her into this arrangement. Jack turned his gaze back to her, his eyes searching hers, a flicker of surprise in their depths. You understand, he said, not a question but a statement. His voice was no longer distant but present, direct. Emma nodded slowly, her hand tightening around the mug. More than you know, she admitted, a whisper of her own past sorrows escaping. My own mother, she's been ill for a long time. The thought of losing her, of that emptiness. Her voice trailed off, thick with emotion. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and Emma felt an unexpected connection bloom between them. It was not the contrived intimacy of their public charade, but something raw and genuine. The air between them, once so formal, now felt charged with a shared understanding, a quiet recognition of kindred spirits navigating their own private battles. The warmth of the coffee radiated through her hands. That's why you took this arrangement, isn't it? Jack asked, his voice gentle, devoid of judgment. For her, to pay her medical bills. Emma met his gaze, her blue eyes brimming with unshed tears. The truth of his words hung in the air, undeniable. She nodded, unable to speak, a lump forming in her throat. The desperation that had driven her, the gnawing fear felt suddenly exposed, but not judged. He reached across the counter, his hand hovering for a moment before gently covering hers, still wrapped around the warm mug. His touch was light, reassuring, utterly unexpected. A jolt, soft yet potent, shot through Emma's arm, spreading warmth through her entire body. It was not a calculated touch, not part of their act, but a genuine gesture of comfort. His skin felt warm against hers, his fingers long and strong. I'm sorry, he said, his voice husky, that you have to carry such a burden. His thumb began to slowly, almost unconsciously, trace patterns on the back of her hand. The simple gesture sent a shiver down Emma's spine, a sensation both comforting and intensely disorienting. She felt her breath catch, her heart beginning to pound a soft rhythm against her ribs. The taste of coffee suddenly seemed bitter. Emma found herself unable to pull away, unable to speak. His touch was a silent language, conveying more solace than any words could. She looked into his eyes and saw not just compassion, but a reflection of her own pain, her own loneliness. It was a mirror held up to her soul, revealing a profound connection she had never anticipated with this man, her contractual fiancé. The moment stretched, timeless and fragile. You carry yours well, Emma finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. She thought of his stoic exterior, the weight of his company, his daughter, his grief. He was a man burdened by immense responsibility, yet he bore it with a quiet strength. The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable. She saw a flicker in his eyes, a response to her genuine observation. He smiled then, a small, sad curve of his lips that reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. It was not the practiced, polite smile he wore in public, but a genuine, albeit melancholic expression. And you, Emma, he said, his voice soft, almost intimate. You carry yours with remarkable grace. His thumb continued its gentle ministrations, a silent reassurance. The air around them crackled with an unspoken understanding. Emma felt a blush rise to her cheeks, a warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee in her hand. His words, so simple, yet so profound, touched a part of her she had long thought dormant. She realized in that moment, with startling clarity, that despite their artificial arrangement, they were two profoundly lonely souls drawn together by unexpected currents of shared human experience. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. His gaze deepened, lingering on her face, tracing the curve of her cheek, the slight tremor of her lips. Emma felt an intense awareness of his presence, a heightened sensitivity to the scent of his cologne, the warmth of his hand, the depth of his gray eyes. It felt as if the world outside the kitchen had ceased to exist, leaving only them, suspended in a bubble of fragile, emergent intimacy. The quiet hum of the refrigerator seemed to fade into nothingness. A powerful, undeniable current passed between them, a silent language spoken through their linked hands and their unwavering gazes. It was a recognition of something far deeper than their contract, something that transcended their separate worlds. The unspoken feelings stirred beneath the surface of their arrangement, pushing against the boundaries of their carefully constructed lives. As their eyes met across the dimly lit room, a powerful, undeniable current passes between them, leaving them both acutely aware of the unspoken feelings stirring beneath the surface of their arrangement. The grand staircase felt impossibly wide and silent beneath Emma's feet. The echo of her own footsteps seemed to mock the quiet fury that still hummed beneath her skin. Jack's harsh words from earlier had stung, a fresh wound on top of old ones, but the flicker of pain she had seen in his eyes remained a persistent, confusing image. She had retreated to her temporary sanctuary, the opulent guest bedroom, but sleep offered no solace. The vastness of the estate, usually a comfort, now felt like an empty chasm. She found herself drifting through the moonlit corridors, drawn by an unseen pull. A soft, almost imperceptible light spilled from under the door to Jack's study. Curiosity, or perhaps a subconscious need to understand the man who had so drastically altered her life, guided her steps. She hesitated at the threshold, the rich scent of old leather and fine wood filling her nostrils. The air felt heavy, charged with a profound melancholy. Through the slightly ajar door, she saw him. Jack sat slumped in his large executive chair, his back to her, a single lamp casting a warm, solitary glow low over his shoulders. His usually impeccable posture was gone, replaced by a weariness that twisted something inside Emma. His head was bowed, and in his hands he held a small, silver-framed photograph. The quiet reverence of his posture spoke volumes, silencing any lingering resentment Emma might have felt. She watched as he gently traced the image with his thumb, a gesture so tender, so utterly vulnerable that it caught her breath in her throat. The silver frame glinted softly in the lamplight. He sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 unspoken sorrows. Emma could not see the image, but she did not need to. She knew it was his late wife. A profound understanding settled over Emma. This was not the ruthless CEO, the man who dealt in contracts and cold business. This was a man stripped bare by grief, aching with a loss that time could not heal. She felt a profound empathy, a recognition of her own deep-seated loneliness mirroring his. The air in the room seemed to thicken with unspoken pain, a shared sorrow that transcended their superficial arrangement. She saw the tremor in his hand as he brought the photograph closer to his chest, almost as if trying to physically absorb the image. Emma's heart beat with a sudden, unexpected pang. She knew what that kind of grief felt like, the hollow ache in the chest, the constant presence of an absence. Her own losses, though different, had carved similar voids. She wanted to turn away, to respect his private moment, but a strange compulsion held her rooted to the spot. The silence was broken only by the soft creak of the floorboards as he shifted, drawing a ragged breath. She saw the subtle tension in his jaw, the slight clench of his fingers around the photograph. He lowered the photo, placing it carefully on the polished surface of his desk. His gaze remained fixed on it, lost in a memory she could only guess at. His shoulders, usually so broad and confident, seemed to carry an invisible burden. The quiet atmosphere of the room was punctuated by the distant chime of a grandfather clock downstairs, marking the slow passage of a lonely night. She noticed a faint sheen of moisture in his eyes, catching the lamplight, a testament to the raw, untamed grief that still lived within him. Emma retreated silently, her own thoughts a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The argument from earlier now seemed trivial, overshadowed by the stark reality of his pain. She felt a strange protectiveness toward him, a desire to shield him from the suffering she had just witnessed. It was a feeling she had not anticipated, a warmth blooming in her chest that felt both foreign and deeply familiar. The opulent estate, once a cold prison, now seemed to hold a fragile, shared vulnerability. Later that night, or perhaps in the early hours of dawn, a faint cry pierced the deep silence of the mansion. Emma stirred from a fitful sleep, her senses immediately alert. Another cry, louder this time, filled with childlike distress. It was Sarah. Emma's instincts took over. She threw off the covers, her bare feet meeting the cold marble floor as she rushed toward the sound. The cries were coming from the room adjacent to hers, Sarah's bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, revealing a dim nightlight casting soft shadows across the room. Sarah was sitting upright in her bed, her small body trembling, her face streaked with tears. "Mama," she whimpered, her voice tiny and raw with fear. Emma's heart constricted. She hurried to the bedside, her hand instinctively reaching out to stroke the child's hair. The soft silk of Sarah's blanket felt cool beneath Emma's fingers. "Sarah, what is it, sweetie?" Emma asked softly, her voice gentle and soothing. The room smelled faintly of lavender and a child's clean innocence. Sarah buried her face in Emma's shoulder, her small arms clinging tightly. "A monster," she sobbed, her voice muffled against Emma's nightgown. Emma held her close, rocking her gently, murmuring reassurances. She felt the rapid beat of the child's heart against her own. She smoothed Sarah's hair, her gaze sweeping the room for anything that might have triggered the nightmare. The shadows from the nightlight danced on the walls, transforming familiar objects into frightening shapes. Emma hummed a quiet tune, a lullaby her own mother used to sing, feeling the tension slowly ease from Sarah's small frame. The child's breathing began to steady, her sobs subsiding into hiccoughs. Just then the door opened wider and Jack appeared, his face etched with concern. He was dressed in a dark robe, his hair slightly disheveled, clearly having been roused from sleep. The scent of him, faint and masculine, filled the air. His eyes, usually so guarded, held a raw anxiety as he took in Sarah's tear-streaked face. He saw Emma holding his daughter, a picture of quiet comfort. "What happened, Princess?" he asked, his voice softer than Emma had ever heard it. He moved closer, his presence filling the small space. Sarah whimpered again, clinging to Emma. Emma looked up at Jack, offering him a reassuring smile. "Just a bad dream," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "A monster," she said. Jack knelt by the bed, his hand reaching out to touch Sarah's arm. His touch was hesitant, almost uncertain. Emma shifted, allowing Jack to come closer, but Sarah did not release her. It was a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but Jack noticed. He saw the genuine care in Emma's eyes, the way she held his daughter so naturally. A flicker of something unreadable passed across his face, a blend of relief and perhaps a touch of awe. The moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. "It's okay, sweetheart," Jack murmured, his voice laced with tenderness. "Daddy's here. Emma's here." He looked at Emma, a silent question in his eyes, a request for help that he could not voice. Emma understood. She continued to stroke Sarah's hair, whispering soft words until the child's eyelids grew heavy. The tension in Jack's shoulders began to relax, his features softening. Finally, Sarah's breathing became even, her grip on Emma's nightgown loosening. She was fast asleep, nestled safely between the two adults. Emma carefully eased herself away, pulling the blanket gently over Sarah's shoulders. The warmth of the child's body still lingered against her. Jack watched her every move, his expression unreadable. But the anxiety had left his eyes. They held something akin to gratitude. They stepped out of the room, leaving the door ajar, and walked down the quiet hallway towards the kitchen. The house was still, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator. The scent of brewing coffee began to fill the air as Jack started the machine. Emma felt a strange intimacy in the shared silence, a bond forged in the quiet act of comforting a child. She leaned against the counter, the cool marble a stark contrast to the warmth that had bloomed in her chest. "Thank you," Jack said, his voice low and sincere. He turned to face her, a mug of steaming coffee in his hand, offering her one. She usually calls for me." Emma took the mug, feeling the warmth seep into her fingers. "It's all right," she replied, looking down at the swirling, dark liquid. "Sometimes a different presence can be calming." She felt a blush creep up her neck, embarrassed by the sudden intimacy of the moment. The air between them felt different, less charged with the transactional nature of their agreement, more with a shared human experience. The quiet hum of the coffee maker was the only sound for a moment. Emma looked up, meeting his gaze. His gray eyes, usually so sharp and analytical, held a softness she had not seen before, a reflection of the vulnerability she had witnessed earlier in his study. She felt a pull, an unspoken invitation. "I saw you earlier," Emma confessed, her voice barely a whisper. She watched his expression carefully, half expecting him to stiffen, to revert to his guarded persona. He did not. Instead, a shadow passed over his features, a familiar cloud of sorrow. The photograph, she clarified, her gaze dropping to her coffee mug again. The steam rose, tickling her nose. He sighed, a deep, weary sound that echoed the one she had heard earlier. Yes, he said simply, his voice rough. Eleanor. His wife's name hung in the air between them, a fragile, painful presence. Emma felt a wave of empathy wash over her. She imagined the beautiful woman in the photograph, the life they must have shared, the sudden, brutal rupture of it. The quiet sorrow in his eyes was almost unbearable. She was a wonderful woman, Jack continued, his voice distant, lost in memory. Kind, brilliant. The world felt brighter with her in it. He took a slow sip of his coffee, his gaze fixed on some point beyond Emma, beyond the kitchen walls. Sarah looks so much like her. It's a constant reminder of what I lost. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of deep frustration and pain. Emma listened, her own heart stirring with a profound sadness that was not entirely her own. She understood the weight of those words. Losing someone you love, Emma began, her voice soft. It changes you in ways you can't predict. The silence is the loudest part. She thought of her own mother, whose health was fading, and the fear of that inevitable silence, the fear that spurred her into this arrangement. Jack turned his gaze back to her, his eyes searching hers, a flicker of surprise in their depths. You understand, he said, not a question but a statement. His voice was no longer distant but present, direct. Emma nodded slowly, her hand tightening around the mug. More than you know, she admitted, a whisper of her own past sorrows escaping. My own mother. She's been ill for a long time. The thought of losing her, of that emptiness. Her voice trailed off, thick with emotion. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and Emma felt an unexpected connection bloom between them. It was not the contrived intimacy of their public charade, but something raw and genuine. The air between them, once so formal, now felt charged with a shared understanding, a quiet recognition of kindred spirits navigating their own private battles. The warmth of the coffee radiated through her hands. That's why you took this arrangement, isn't it? Jack ended, his voice gentle, devoid of judgment. For her, to pay her medical bills. Emma met his gaze, her blue eyes brimming with unshed tears. The truth of his words hung in the air, undeniable. She nodded, unable to speak, a lump forming in her throat. The desperation that had driven her, the gnawing fear, felt suddenly exposed but not judged. He reached across the counter, his hand hovering for a moment before gently covering hers, still wrapped around the warm mug. His touch was light, reassuring, utterly unexpected. A jolt, soft yet potent, shot through Emma's arm, spreading warmth through her entire body. It was not a calculated touch, not part of their act, but a genuine gesture of comfort. His skin felt warm against hers, his fingers long and strong. Emma found herself unable to pull away, unable to speak. His touch was a silent language, conveying more solace than any words could. She looked into his eyes and saw not just compassion, but a reflection of her own pain, her own loneliness. It was a mirror held up to her soul, revealing a profound connection she had never anticipated with this man, her contractual fiancé. The moment stretched, timeless and fragile. You carry yours well, Emma finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. She thought of his stoic exterior, the weight of his company, his daughter, his grief. He was a man burdened by immense responsibility, yet he bore it with a quiet strength. The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable. She saw a flicker in his eyes, a response to her genuine observation. He smiled then, a small sad curve of his lips that reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. It was not the practiced, polite smile he wore in public, but a genuine, albeit melancholic expression. And you, Emma, he said, his voice soft, almost intimate, you carry yours with remarkable grace. His thumb continued its gentle ministrations, a silent reassurance. The air around them crackled with an unspoken understanding. Emma felt a blush rise to her cheeks, a warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee in her hand. His words, so simple, yet so profound, touched a part of her she had long thought dormant. She realized in that moment, with startling clarity, that despite their artificial arrangement, they were two profoundly lonely souls, drawn together by unexpected currents of shared human experience. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. His gaze deepened, lingering on her face, tracing the curve of her cheek, the slight tremor of her lips. Emma felt an intense awareness of his presence, a heightened sensitivity to the scent of his cologne, the warmth of his hand, the depth of his gray eyes. It felt as if the world outside the kitchen had ceased to exist, leaving only them, suspended in a bubble of fragile, emergent intimacy. The quiet hum of the refrigerator seemed to fade into nothingness. As their eyes meet across the dimly lit room, a powerful, undeniable current passes between them, leaving them both acutely aware of the unspoken feelings stirring beneath the surface of their arrangement. The whispers began subtly. Emma heard them from hushed staff, then saw them in knowing glances at events. Peter Sterling made good on his threats. He moved with cold ruthlessness, a predator scenting weakness in the Harrison Empire. His campaign started with barbed questions. They came with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He questioned Jack's business decisions, hinting at his lack of focus since his wife's passing. Then came the rumors, burrowing into public perception. They spoke of Emma's humble origins, her sudden appearance, and their incredibly fast engagement. Every planted article chipped at Jack's credibility. It undermined the stability needed for the merger. Emma felt the weight of every gaze, the unspoken judgment. The gossip tasted bitter. Ballrooms felt like stages under harsh lights. Cameras flashed. Conversations ceased when she approached. A chill settled in the air, a reminder of her precarious position. She clutched the Harrison engagement ring, its cold platinum an anchor against rising unease. One rainy afternoon, Emma passed Jack's study. The door was ajar, letting out the scent of leather and strong coffee. She paused, intending to ask if he needed anything. Then she heard his voice, tight with frustration. "He is systematically dismantling every aspect of this deal, Thomas," Jack said, his voice a low growl. "Sterling is spreading outright fabrications about our financial projections. Now he targets my personal life with vengeance." Emma froze, her hand hovering. Her breath caught. She heard his corporate attorney, equally strained. "The board is getting jittery, Jack. Some international investors reconsider. They see any instability as a major risk." Cold dread spread through Emma's chest. She leaned closer, her heart pounding. "He's even implying," the lawyer continued, barely a whisper, "that your engagement is a cynical ploy, a desperate attempt to shore up your image. He mentioned a woman of questionable background joining your family. He's digging, Jack, deep." The words struck Emma like physical blows. Questionable background, a cynical ploy. It was true in a way, yet his malice made it sting. She felt profound nausea. The merger, her reason for being here, was in critical danger. Their careful charade, her brief escape, could unravel. The chill in the air felt suffocating. She backed away, silently, her steps muffled. Retreating to her room, the taste of fear was sharp. Her hand went to her stomach, a familiar reflex against gnawing anxiety. Jack's schedule grew brutal. He worked from dawn until late, his face drawn with exhaustion. The study light burned continuously. Emma often found him hunched over his desk, surrounded by documents. The air was thick with stress and stale coffee. He ate little, slept less. His sharp gray eyes, usually focused, now seemed shadowed. His interactions grew terse, his patience gone. He snapped at staff. His usual stoicism was replaced by a volatile edginess. Emma watched him, her heart aching with sympathy and apprehension. She understood his immense burden. The weight of his legacy and Sarah's future rested on his shoulders. The air around him crackled with fury, waiting for an outlet. One evening, Emma tried to reach him. She prepared a light supper, hoping he might eat. She brought it to his study. The rich smell of warm soup filled the air as she placed the tray on his desk. "Jack," she began softly, a gentle inquiry. "You haven't eaten all day. You need to rest." He did not look up from his financial report, his jaw tight. The desk lamp illuminated the deep lines of fatigue around his eyes. I don't have time, Emma, he mumbled, his voice rough with strain. He had barely acknowledged her. She tried again, a hesitant step forward. But you'll wear yourself out. This isn't helping you. She gestured at the papers, the flickering screen. Suddenly, he slammed his hand down. The sound made her jump. The soup's aroma vanished. He looked up, his gray eyes blazing. Don't you think I know that? He snarled, raw with anger. Don't you think I want to simply stop? To sleep? To pretend this isn't all collapsing around me? Emma recoiled, a gasp catching in her throat. His words were a slap, her cheeks flushed with surprise and humiliation. She had only tried to help. This entire arrangement, he continued, his voice rising, cutting like shards of glass. This charade you and I are playing, it is supposed to help me, Emma. It is supposed to provide an image of stability. Instead, Sterling is using it, using us, to tear down everything I have built. He gestured wildly, as if it were her fault. The anger was thick, suffocating. Her stomach churned. He was blaming her. After the lacing, the scrutiny, the constant performance, he blamed her for Sterling's attacks. I am doing everything I can, Jack, she managed, her voice trembling. I follow every instruction. I play the part. What more do you want from me? A fierce sting came behind her eyes. He stood, towering over her, casting a long shadow. His fists were clenched. I want this merger to go through. I want my company to survive. I want to protect my daughter. And right now, he spat, his gaze burning, you are just another complication. Another vulnerability Sterling can exploit. A cold silence fell. The only sound was Emma's ragged breathing and the computer's hum. The words echoed, another complication, another vulnerability. The air felt thin, impossibly cold. The soup's warmth forgotten. A bitter, metallic taste filled her mouth. A profound emptiness opened inside her. A familiar ache she thought she had escaped. Her eyes burned, but she refused tears. She would not give him that. Her jaw tightened. She looked at him, seeing not the vulnerable man, but the ruthless CEO, cornered and lashing out. The coldness of the Harrison engagement ring intensified. It felt less like salvation, more like a heavy, hollow burden. It was a tangible reminder of the lie, the contract, the growing chasm. Without another word, Emma turned, stiff and deliberate. She walked away from the study, from his desperation and cruel words. Each step echoed in the vast hallway, carrying her further. She left the wreckage of their fragile understanding. The ring felt like an anchor dragging her down, heavy and cold and utterly hollow. She questioned if their lie could withstand this crushing pressure. The corporate gala glittered with a false cheer. Emma held a champagne flute, her ring a heavy reminder of her elaborate role. Across the room, Jack's jaw was tight. He seemed to carry the night's burden. The air smelled of perfume and anxiety. Jack stood rigid with investors. Emma noticed a tremor in his hand, a crack in his composure. A protective urge overcame her lingering hurt from his harsh words. Peter Sterling appeared beside Jack, his smile predatory. His low voice held an insincere edge. Jack stiffened, his eyes narrowing. Sterling's words grew pointed, his smug expression conveying much. Emma felt a sudden defiance rise within her. Sterling gestured at Emma, then whispered something to Jack. Jack's face drained of color, raw pain flashing across his features. Emma felt a primal instinct to defend him, despite their friction. Her fury on Jack's behalf was undeniably real. Emma stepped forward, her heels clicking softly. She approached with a calm face, though her heart hammered. Her hand found Jack's arm, a light, firm signal. Jack, darling, she began, her voice clear and steady. I was just telling Mrs. Albright what a brilliant stroke of genius your new initiative is. She was captivated. Sterling's smirk faltered. Jack looked at her, his gray eyes wide with surprise and gratitude. His tension eased under her touch. Oh, Emma, Jack said, his voice rough but quickly recovering. He turned, presenting a united front with her. You always know how to charm the room. Emma smiled sweetly at Sterling, her eyes cold. Mr. Sterling, I hope you are enjoying the evening. Jack was just explaining your investment in Harrison Enterprises. Such commitment is truly admirable. Sterling's eyes narrowed, his face showing thwarted malice. He had not anticipated her intervention. He managed a strained chuckle. Always a pleasure, Mrs. Harrison, to be. Excuse us, I was just having a private word with Jack. Emma's grip on Jack's arm tightened. I am sure you were, Mr. Sterling. But duty calls, perhaps later when Jack is less preoccupied. Sterling gave a curt nod, irritated, and vanished into the crowd. Emma felt exhilarated yet profoundly shaken. She had acted purely on instinct, a rush of loyalty beyond their agreement. Jack turned to her, his gaze intense. Emma, he said low, a question in the word. A blush crept up her neck. He was exceptionally unpleasant, she murmured, adrenaline still coursing. Someone had to say something. He looked at her for a long moment, deep emotion in his eyes, making her breath catch. The party noise faded. They stood in a bubble of quiet intensity. Thank you, he finally said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. He kept her arm, his fingers brushing her skin. A jolt ran through her. Later, the Harrison estate fell silent. Emma stood alone in the vast living room. She looked out at the moonlit gardens, the city lights twinkling in the distance. The gala replayed in her mind, Sterling's venom, Jack's vulnerability, mostly his look, his silent gratitude, the almost imperceptible squeeze of his hand. This was more than their agreement, more than a charade. A soft click echoed. Jack entered, tie loosened, shirt unbuttoned. He looked tired, but his gaze held hers. He walked slowly towards her. The air grew thick with unspoken things. Emma turned, her heart pounding, hands trembling. The silence stretched, charged with tension, like before a storm. He stopped feet away. His cologne reached her. She saw his chest rise and fall, the intensity in his eyes. Her own breathing quickened. She wanted to speak, but no words came. He lifted a hand, reaching out. His fingers brushed her cheek, sending shivers. His touch was light, a silent question. She leaned into it, closing her eyes for a brief moment. She opened her eyes. He was closer. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. Unspoken words, shared vulnerability, the day's stress all converged. Then he leaned in. His lips met hers, tentative then powerful, stealing her breath. It was a kiss born of desperate hunger. Her fingers curled into his shirt. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her close. She tasted champagne and something uniquely Jack. His kiss was demanding, urgent, a racing reason. It shattered their contract's boundaries, the walls they had built. This was real, everything they had denied. Her mind reeled with his body's press, his lips' warmth, her frantic heart. It felt forbidden, yet utterly right, an exhilarating plunge. Then, as suddenly as it began, he pulled away. The abrupt separation left her gasping. Jack's face was inches away, his breathing ragged, eyes clouded with conflict. He looked haunted, a mask of warring emotions. His hands remained on her waist, but the connection felt fragile. He stared, intense, unreadable. Confusion and longing warred within Emma. Her body still thrummed, but his withdrawal left her cold. She searched his tormented eyes for an explanation, for a sign. He offered nothing. He stepped back, breaking contact, his hands falling away. He turned to the darkened gardens, shoulders stiff. The silence returned, aching, filled with the echo of a kiss that had changed everything. Emma brought a trembling hand to her lips, still tingling. Her heart hammered with fear and a terrifying hope for a future now far beyond their simple contract. The morning light felt harsh as Emma descended the grand staircase. The phantom warmth of Jack's kiss lingered, a mix of hope and trepidation. A worried housemaid dropped a newspaper on a side table. Its bold black headlines screamed. Emma's breath caught. Her name, large-eyed, stared from the glossy page. A grainy photo showed her tear-streaked face from the Grand Bistro. The article detailed her crippling debt, her mother's medical bills, and the public abandonment that led her to Jack. It painted her as a conniving gold digger, desperate enough to ensnare a widower. The words echoed her deepest fears. Her fingers locked on the cool paper, crumpling the edges. A bitter taste filled her mouth. This was Peter Sterling's work, she knew with sickening certainty. He found her weakest point and exploited it. The cold tone of the article stripped away her dignity. Jack's quick footsteps descended from his study. The air crackled with tension. He stopped halfway down the stairs, his eyes burning with raw anger. He held the same tabloid, its pages shaking. His jaw was tight, a muscle twitching. His fury was a palpable force. "Is this true?" His voice was low and dangerous. "Did you tell anyone about the contract? Did you feed this to the press?" Emma flinched. The accusation was a physical blow. Hope from the kiss withered instantly. Tears stung her eyes. "Jack, no. Why would I do that?" Her voice was a whisper, thick with disbelief. "Why destroy everything we have built, everything I've gained?" He descended the steps, stopping feet away, his gaze relentless. "Everything you've gained, or everything you were promised? What better way to secure your future than to force my hand, make this fake engagement permanent?" He scoffed. "You came from nothing, Emma. You gained from chaos." The words pierced her composure. She felt cold, exposed. "How dare you?" Her voice rose, laced with ferocity. Shame gave way to indignation. "You think I would deliberately expose myself? Relive that humiliation? Betray you after everything?" She gestured at the paper, then the hall. "This was to save my mother, Jack. My only way out. Why would I risk it for headlines?" His eyes narrowed, searching hers. "Then how did Sterling get this? He did not just stumble upon your finances in the restaurant incident. Someone talked." He gripped the paper tighter. "My company, my family's legacy, is on the line. This merger hangs by a thread. You, Emma, are at the center. And you think I put myself there?" Her voice trembled with profound hurt. "Do you forget the humiliation I faced? The reason I was in that restaurant? I was abandoned, Jack, left with a crushing bill and a broken heart. You think I would choose to relive that trauma, laid bare for the world to mock?" A single tear traced a hot path down her cheek. His accusations poured salt into an open wound. He looked away, running a hand through his dark hair. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his eyes. He seemed torn. "I do not know what to believe anymore, Emma. Last night changed things." His voice dropped, a hint of vulnerability. "I kissed you. Now this. It feels too convenient, too perfectly timed." "Convenient?" Emma stared aghast. "You think I orchestrated this because of a kiss? Because of feelings I was not even sure I should have?" Her heart hammered, a frantic drumbeat. "You think my desperation was some elaborate scheme to manipulate you?" The pain was sharp. He saw her as a calculating pawn. He turned back, his gaze hardening. "I do not know what to think, Emma. The stakes are too high. My investors, my board, question my judgment. This merger is everything. It is Sarah's future." The mention of Sarah steeled his resolve, pushing her further away. "And what about my future, Jack?" she challenged, her voice breaking. "What about my mother? You think I would gamble their lives for twisted gain? Do you believe the woman you kissed last night, the one who listens to Sarah, is capable of such calculated cruelty?" His face remained impassive, a wall between them. The grand hall amplified their voices, echoing in the empty space. Neither noticed Sarah, a small, pajama-clad figure, peeking from the breakfast room. Drawn by the loudness, she stood frozen, eyes wide with fear. She heard snippets of their argument: tabloid, betrayal, future. She heard her father's sharp tone, Emma's tear-streaked face, and her small heart ached. "I have done everything you asked, Jack," Emma continued, trembling but firm. "I played the part. I endured the scrutiny. I even began to feel—" She stopped, biting back the words. "I stood by you, Jack, and you accuse me." Her bruised pride resurfaced. The man who had shown her kindness now looked at her like a stranger. Jack looked at Sarah, then Emma. His expression held anger, disappointment, and sorrow. He pulled back, building walls. The air grew thick with unspoken words, with shattered trust. He took a slow, deliberate breath. "I need to go," he said, his voice flat, colder than fury. "I need to deal with this. My lawyers will be in touch about the contract." The words hung, a death knell. His eyes, once full of longing, held a chilling distance. He turned, walked away, his footsteps echoing on the polished marble. He did not look back. Emma stood alone in the vast, silent hall. The crisp rustle of the tabloid in her hand was the only sound. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, mirroring the emptiness in her heart. After Jack left, the grand hall's silence rang in Emma's ears. The clock's tick echoed her racing pulse. The Harrison engagement ring felt heavy, meaningless. The air, once promising, now felt sharp. She gripped the fireplace stone, trying to anchor herself. A sitting room television flickered on. Peter Sterling's sneering face filled the screen. Reporters' flashes popped around him. His oily voice hinted at corporate deception. Emma's stomach tightened. He spoke of her, twisting her past for his gain. Shame burned her cheeks. Her knuckles whitened on the mantel. Jack appeared on screen, stepping forward, his expression hard. He stood beside Sterling, silencing him. Emma felt the room hold its breath. Jack looked into the cameras, fire in his eyes. He dismissed the rumors as baseless attacks. His voice, usually calm, now thrummed with fierce protectiveness. "My fiancée, Emma Roberts," Jack stated, his gaze piercing, "is a woman of unparalleled strength and integrity. Any suggestion otherwise is a vile and cowardly slander." Emma gasped, a choked sound. Tears blurred her vision. A sudden warmth spread through her chest. She watched him, transfixed. He spoke of his love for Emma with raw sincerity. He admitted their challenges, but emphasized their real bond. He spoke only of Emma, their future, and a love that had grown. His defiant words hung. He spoke of Sarah, of the joy Emma brought. Reporters quieted, surprised. Sterling stumbled, his attack crumbling. Jack's defense was personal. He protected her. A tear of relief traced Emma's cheek. That evening, the Harrison estate was quiet. Emma sat in the library, processing the day. Her heart held disbelief and elation. Jack found her by the bay window. As he closed the door, she turned. His gaze was softer, no longer guarded. He looked tired, but peace settled around him. "You defended me," Emma whispered, her voice raw. "You risked everything." Jack stepped closer. "I risked nothing," he replied, his voice low. "I simply spoke the truth. The merger, the company, none of it mattered if I lost what I truly found." He paused, his gray eyes searching hers. "And what I found, Emma, was you." A tremor ran through Emma. Her breath caught. Walls around her heart, built by abandonment, began to crumble. She remembered signing the contract, a cold calculation. Now she saw a man who faced the world for her. She stepped tentatively. "I was so afraid," she confessed, her voice thick with tears. "Afraid of the lie, of losing my dignity. Then I feared losing you." Words tumbled out, unbidden. "I never thought I would feel this belonging, this warmth again." Tears of release welled up. She had never allowed such vulnerability. Jack reached out, his hand gently touching her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear. His touch was warm, comforting, and utterly real. "You don't have to be afraid, Emma," he said husky. "Not anymore." He looked down at the Harrison engagement ring on her finger, then back into her eyes. That ring was a symbol of a contract, a transaction. "I want it to be a symbol of something real. Of us." He took her hand, his fingers firm and reassuring. "Will you make it real, Emma? Will you choose to be my wife, not just my fiancée?" Emma's heart leaped. She saw not the CEO who offered a deal, but the man of kindness, vulnerability, and love. The man who played with Sarah, worried about staff, and built a new future. "Yes, Jack," she whispered, certain through her tears. 1,000 times, yes. The next morning, sun streamed into the Harrison estate breakfast room. Coffee and pastries filled the air. Sarah sat, spreading jam. She looked up as Jack and Emma Mom entered, hand in hand. Quiet joy replaced the day's tension. "Papa, Emma," Sarah chirped, "are you both happy now?" Jack knelt, his arm around Emma. "Yes, sweetheart," he said, soft with emotion. "We are very, very happy." He glanced at Emma. "Emma has agreed to stay with us, always." Sarah's eyes widened. Then she clapped with delight. "Really? Always? Like a real family?" She hugged Emma, then Jack. Emma felt warmth, a belonging she craved. The merger, once everything, now felt distant. Their love eclipsed all else. Later that week, Jack took Emma to a jewelry shop to resize the Harrison engagement ring. As the jeweler measured, Emma looked at the magnificent vintage platinum ring. Its diamond, flanked by sapphires, now sparkled. It felt right. Jack gently took Emma's hand, his thumb tracing circles over the ring. It was now a symbol of true love and a shared future. They stepped forward, hand in hand, towards a life they never anticipated.